Another oceanic influence on weather, moving cold or warm waters around the edges of the continents. These currents also distribute nutrients from one area of the ocean to another. Physical oceanographers have expanded our understanding of wave-producing forces such as the winds and tides. They have even been able to predict the speed of seismic waves, tsunamis, in order to establish an early warning system. One of the most obvious characteristics of the sea is the ebb and flow along the beach, the tides. This daily change of sea level along the coast is the result of the combined pull of both the sun and the moon.
And what happens is that if you imagine yourself being directly between the center of the Earth and the moon will pull on the surface of the Earth somewhat stronger than on the center of the Earth because it's closer, and in that way will pull it away from the center of the Earth, causing a high tide. On the other hand, if you are at the antilunar point, on the opposite side of the Earth, the moon will pull the center of the Earth away from you, and again you'll be further from the center of the Earth, and again you will have a high tide. And this simple idea will perhaps make it clear why there are 2 high tides a day, even though there's only one tide-producing body.
The oceans are, of course, much more than the combination of water and the land around them. They are full of life. The very small floating and drifting plants and animals called plankton not only form the basis of the marine food chain, but also produce at least half the oxygen we breathe. The other large category of marine life are the nekton, the swimming animals, the fishes and sharks, the squid and octopi. But the marine environment contains many other kinds of animals that we don't usually associate with the ocean. There are several types of reptiles, such as the sea snake, the iguana, and the marine crocodile, that make their living primarily from the sea. And in addition to the common seagull, pelican, and albatross, some marine birds have developed the ability to drink seawater and stay aloft for hours. There are, of course, a great variety of mammals who spend most or all of their lives in the sea. Although they can still function on land, the seals and otters have evolved the ability to live in the water for extended periods. They've even developed an ability to shift blood to their vital organs in order to stay submerged, hunting for food. The other group of marine mammals, the whales, have completely adapted to the marine environment. Scientists have found that the smaller whales, the porpoises, are easily trained and possess a unique echolocation system, or sonar, that allows them to find even small objects in the water.
What happens is that the frequency of this particular sound is pitched very high and can be regulated by the particular whale, and that is usually specific to the species. These particular sounds then are emitted from the melon area, or that area that you see sloping down to the beak. Behind this is a series of cavities and the larynx and the blowhole, and behind that is the brain. So these particular sounds are emitted from the melon area, go out, bounce off whatever is out there, whether it be food, other animals, the bottom, obstruction, to the degree that these animals can find a dime at the bottom of a pool blindfolded. And it's that sensitive. These sounds then come back and enter into holes in the lower jaw. And actually, instead of having the ears do all the work, they use other parts of their jaw skeleton. And these, of course, then set up in resonance with this, and they read this pitch and can decide exactly where they are in location to any given either an object or a food source or a bottom. And this particular adaptation allows them to virtually inhabit their environment and feed and do well, even though they may be completely blind.
Although porpoises were seriously threatened by accidental kills related to tuna fishing, the problem has been greatly reduced recently. However, many of the large whales still face extinction at the hands of hunters. The animals that live in the deep sea have also developed intriguing adaptations to the extreme pressures of their environment. They must equalize their internal body pressure to keep from being crushed. They must also accommodate themselves to long periods without food. One of the most exciting recent discoveries is a group of animals living around the hydrothermal vents off the Galapagos Islands.
Most of the animals in the hydrothermal vents are living on bacteria. And this seems to me the main food source, in contrast to other areas of the deep sea where all the animals are dependent on food filtering down from the surface. So it's a completely self-contained ecosystem. And just this beginning of this year, we went back to the area. I led a biological expedition to the area, and we went back to the vents using, again, the research submarine Alvin, and did a whole series of biological studies on the vents. We find spectacularly large animals, high concentrations of very big animals. There's a large worm which has a tube which is 10 to 12 feet in length. The worm itself, we've collected one specimen that was about 8.5 feet long, and the worm itself is about 5 feet long and about 2 inches in diameter. They have a brilliant red tip, and the brilliant red end of the worm is hemoglobin, which they use to take oxygen out of seawater. There are a series of lamellae, which are highly vascularized, lots of small blood vessels, and the animal has no gut. And so we think it's also taking food out of the water, and the food is dissolved organic material.
For centuries, man has looked upon the ocean as a vast resource. Every year, over 50 million metric tons of fish are harvested from the sea. But as we begin to see the limits of traditional protein sources in the sea, and as the demand increases, we'll have to incorporate new species in our diet. Although ocean farming, or mariculture, holds great potential, it's still not economically feasible on a large scale. There are also vast untapped mineral resources in the marine environment. But as we expand our search for oil, or start commercial mining of manganese nodules, or begin extensive processing of seawater for the compounds it contains, we also have to consider the ecological impact on the world ocean. We have come close to destroying the life in such large bodies of water as Lake Erie, and life in the Mediterranean Sea is seriously threatened by pollution. These problems and other questions about the seas are of vital concern to the many scientists that study the oceans. In the last 100 years, that study has grown into a new scientific discipline.
Oceanography is the study of the marine environment, and as such, it is truly interdisciplinary. It involves the basic sciences, math, chemistry, and physics, but it also includes geology and biology. The numbers of oceanographers is not large. About half are biological oceanographers. The other third are involved in physical oceanography and meteorology. About 20% are involved in geology and chemical oceanography. The numbers of people needed to support these activities is large, however. Ship support people, marine technicians, computer scientists, all add up to a considerable number of people. Marine scientists and oceanographers are those people who spend their lives seeking the answers to questions that man has asked about the oceans for centuries.
The scientists working in the marine environment affect our perceptions and our use or abuse of the ocean. And in turn, the ocean affects the lives of those men and women who explore its changing and complex nature. To those who know it best, the sea is exciting, profound, and personal.
The reasons why people go into oceanography are, the reason why I got into it was I went to Woods Hole as an undergraduate, and I was excited by the new environments that we were trying to study. Something like the discovery of the Galapagos, that really is a very exciting find. It's like going to another world, and that's part of the excitement. But really the most satisfying thing is if you can make sense of something, try to relate what we're finding to some general ecological principle. There's a lot of oceanography that is still descriptive, which is very exciting, but The most important thing is to try and get at these very basic principles, such as what controls rates of biological activity in any environment, how these rates evolved over time. It's when things that you didn't expect to make any sense begin to make sense that it becomes very exciting.
I think most people, including myself, who work in oceanography, feel that they are working with the last frontier on Earth. We've looked at the moon a great deal. We've certainly looked at the continents over the last 200 years, but there are literally hundreds and thousands of square miles of the seafloor that have hardly been looked at all, and certainly not been looked at by the human eye. It is technically possible today to go and see this with the human eye. We have not done that. There are unusual scientific problems that you don't face on land. From the geology and physics standpoint, they're unusual ones, and certainly from the biological ones and so forth, chemical ones, they're very different. So one does get a sense of exploring new areas out of this. I think over and above that, the way you study them is something that I think most people find continually fascinating. When you go to sea, it's a mixture of the intellectual exploration and the necessity to work with the elements. And most people get a satisfaction from that.
Well, my personal satisfaction for this kind of work is that I simply enjoy messing about with unusual and interesting animals. And the organisms that I study are exceptionally beautiful to begin with. They're unusual in terms of their adaptation and their way of life to what we are usually familiar with. But they are also extremely widespread, and they're very common. The environment that I study, the open ocean pelagic ecosystem, is the largest environment on Earth, and it's one of the least known. And the animals that I'm interested in are things which are characteristic, are especially adapted to this environment, and have lived there for millions of years. The fact that they are fragile, beautiful, unusual, only adds to their interest. I think that they're intrinsically important because they are the characteristic inhabitants of such a large part of the Earth's ecosystem. In general, the study of marine zooplankton and of marine ecosystems is important because that's where an awful lot of life exists, and we know very little about it.
I personally enjoy doing the research. I mean, just get a visceral thrill out of it. I enjoy working in that environment. I do enjoy myself when I'm underwater, and I'm very fascinated and curious about how these plants and animals interact with one another. And I certainly think there's great value in it. For its own sake, I think that just the amassing of knowledge is a good thing for its own sake.
Now, that's all well and good, you may say. Sure, okay, we learn a lot, but what good is it? Does it have any value? Well, it's very hard to put your finger on the exact value of flying by Jupiter right now, or learning about the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. But we do know the following. The more man learns about his environment, the better he is able to cope with it. We have nuclear waste. We have environmental hazards of one sort or another. Man-made, dams, things like that. Natural, earthquakes. How do we cope with our environment? We can cope with it far better if we understand what causes the problems. And as we learn to understand why there is a seismicity on the San Andreas Fault, we can perhaps build around it environmentally. We can ultimately one day predict earthquakes. It may be a big problem in terms of social and political impact, but at least it will save lives. And that's, of course, the first consideration.
Over the years, I began to realize that understanding our environment was not only personally satisfying, that is, one can contribute to the general knowledge of our society, but one can also contribute to maintaining a healthy environment. Man now can manipulate the composition of his atmosphere. He can change the composition of ocean waters, river waters. He can change very dramatically our continental terrains. But of greater importance is to utilize all of these resources, the waters of the earth, our atmosphere, our lands, as renewable resources, not non-renewable resources.
We have marshaled energy and technologies that will allow us to destroy our environment at will, and we haven't tempered this with the types of judgments that are involved with the realization of how we depend on our environment for life support. Again, the studies of the oceans and of geology in general have indicated that we are much more dependent on our environment and its quality for our own survival than we might think. And I think some of the answers in terms of what kind of limits there may be to growth and just how much of our environment we can exploit for economic purposes will come from an understanding of how the ocean works, among other systems.
The most bizarre thing that I've encountered as a diver and collector of marine organisms in the ocean has been the human. And the human is obviously out of his element. After a while, when you work with the ocean, you begin to think a little bit in terms of what if marine organisms had the capability of thinking what they might think and how they may regard things. And so the most bizarre thing that we find is not only the human in the ocean, but the impact of the human in the ocean. Because it is truly bizarre, it's truly unnatural, and the impact on the natural systems that the human has exerted is truly bizarre.
We've come to a point where we are making decisions such as, shall there or shall there not be rainforests? Because we'll have that decision to make, are making it. Maybe by default, perhaps consciously, but we're running out of such things and may see the last of them. We may see the last of the whales for similar reasons. We've just reached a time in history when these once and forevermore decisions, like it or not, are ours to make. We didn't ask to make them, but here they are, right on our laps. And the more insight we can gain, the more perspective we can have about what's important, that we aren't alone, that we aren't able to function all by ourselves in this fragile blue sphere in the inky blackness of space. That we've got to know, and with knowing certainly comes caring, and comes the ability, I hope, to survive.
The consequences of our actions in the oceans are really poorly understood, and the early indications are discouraging. The American pioneers, when they looked over the Great Plains, couldn't believe that those rich soils could ever stop giving. The oceans are the new frontier, and we should apply to them some of the lessons we have learned from the land. We're like the early Greeks, looking out over Oceanus, a vast and largely unknown world. How we sail those seas will affect mankind for the rest of life.
To order your copies of the textbook and study guide which accompany the series Oceanus, call our toll-free number, 1-800-777-MIND today. Mind Extension University is the only cable television channel dedicated to sequential telecast of credit and non-credit educational programs 24 hours a day. Plus, it provides complete customer support for registration and for student-instructor contact. The Mind Extension University Bookstore offers a toll-free number for ordering all books and materials, whether for credit or personal enrichment viewing. MEU courses and programs are scheduled in regular time blocks for convenient viewing and taping. Learn on your own time and in your own home.
It's time for my favorite weekly program, Emergency Ward, Saturday Night Dead. I can't wait for this fantastic program starring Dr. Gore and his ravishing nurse, Florence Mockingbird. It's a smashing show. A real killer. Seldom a dull moment. Murders, rapes, stabbings, beatings, poisonings, suicides, incest, cardiacs, and ODs. Oh, if I could only get a clear picture. I don't know why this has to happen to me. I wait all week for my favorite show. I'm just going to have to do something about this to get a clear picture. There, that's much better. I'm sorry you won't get to see Emergency Ward, Saturday Night Dead, starring Dr. Gore, but I hope you will see something on this program that will be interesting and valuable to you. The preceding sequence shows how important clarity is in viewing television. What I'd like to suggest is that it's just as important in writing. If you don't write clearly, you will waste your time and your readers, and you'll annoy and irritate your readers in the bargain. To avoid that, I often give something I've written to a secretary, friend, or my wife to read. If their response is, "That's written beautifully," I know I'm in trouble. That statement usually means that the writing sounds elegant and seems impressive, yet the reader didn't understand it. But if the reader says, "That's clear," or something like that, I'm satisfied. That's the response I want. I want to be clear. But it's difficult to be clear. In one study, 91% of 200 executives from different companies stated that a lack of clarity was the main weakness in the writing of their employees. Why is clarity so difficult to attain? The answer can be found in the communication process. What we write is clear to us. We know what we're saying. But being clear involves communicating to other people in such a way that they can understand us exactly and easily, not having to reread what we've written or guess at its meaning. We've got to write reader-directed rather than writer-directed messages. But it's hard to write for readers. What it involves is translating our ideas into words, sentences, and paragraphs that they can understand clearly. To do so, we must think about our readers constantly, wondering whether they know the meaning of our words, the significance of our sentences, the relationship of our ideas, and the key points of our message. If you keep worrying about those readers when you write, keep wondering about what they'll be thinking, and keep writing to make it easier for them to read, you'll win the battle for clarity. Now, to help you, let me offer several suggestions to enable you to clarify your words, your sentences, and your paragraphs. As far as words are concerned, keep them simple, short, and specific. The 3 S's. Do I really mean simple? Yes, indeed. When I spoke about being clear in this program, I didn't tell you to eschew obfuscation. Sometimes we're tempted to show off, to try to impress readers with our knowledge of words. Don't. Try to avoid that temptation to impress. Concentrate on the need to express. Ask yourself whether your readers will understand what you're saying. Worry about every word. Now, that's what I did in talking about emergency ward Saturday Night Dead when I mentioned ODs. Perhaps I was mistaken in deciding that most of you would understand that reference. But at least I was consciously aware of the problem, concluding that we've all been so informed about the drug scene that you know the term referred to overdoses. Sometimes the problem is caused by a word or words that are used in a special sense in someone's field and in another sense in other fields. For example, when I first started working here in the television studio, I heard someone yell, "Get the shotgun." After looking nervously around to see what they were going to do with it, I found out that in television language, a shotgun is a microphone that can be aimed at people to pick up their voices. So, keeping your language simple means not only selecting words that your readers know, but also using them in a sense that your readers are familiar with. And if you must use a word in a special sense, then define it for them. Now, in addition to keeping your words simple, prefer the short word to the long word, which often is another way of saying keep it simple. Look at this sentence, for example. There should be some modification in the way we promulgate information about the amelioration of our financial transactions. Translated, these 6-foot words can be chopped down to a manageable size. There should be some change in the way we publish news about our improving profits. Now, I leave it to you. Which version would you rather read? The second, obviously. Then that's how you should write, using short words instead of long ones. In addition, you should prefer specific words to abstract ones. Here's why. Suppose someone tried to phone you last night but couldn't reach you about 9 o'clock. Upon being asked what you were doing then, you might respond in any of the following ways. I was busy doing something. I was busy doing something outside. I was busy with my dog outside. I was walking my dog. I was walking my dachshund. I was walking my brown dachshund in the park. Note how much more satisfying the final answer is. A specific word names something you can see, touch, taste, smell, hear, or form a definite idea of. An abstract word stands for so many particular concrete things that it's difficult for people to agree on any precise meaning. Here's an example to illustrate this point. The company offered a fine package of fringe benefits. The phrase fine package is abstract, meaning different benefits to different people. More specific language communicates the idea more clearly to readers. The company offered minimum life and health insurance, disability coverage, a retirement income plan, and paid vacation time to all employees. If appropriate, even more specific details about the dollar limits, coverage, and other benefits could be mentioned. Before turning to sentences now, let's review the 3 S's about words. Keep them short, simple, and specific. And now for another S, sentences. To achieve clarity in sentences, I'd like you to keep them short, to make the subject a person when possible, and to keep the subject close to the verb. Let's begin with short sentences. Here's the problem. Management meetings offer top executives an effective way to publicize policies and to explain them. And the meetings also allow middle managers to inquire about policies and their applications in addition to giving supervisors an opportunity to learn about the reason for policies affecting their operations. You can see how difficult that 46-word monster is to digest. It's just too much for most readers to swallow. But if you chop it into bite sizes, then there's little problem. Management meetings offer top executives an effective way to publicize policies and to explain them, period. Meetings also allow middle managers to inquire about policies and their applications, period. In addition, these meetings give supervisors an opportunity to learn about the reason for policies affecting their operations. By breaking long sentences into short ones, you can clarify your writing for readers. Generally, your sentences should average about 15 to 20 words. Beware of ones in the 30s, unless you're writing to a well-educated audience. And as for whoppers exceeding 40, hack away at them. You'll be interested to know that the two most commonly used readability formulas, one by Flesch and another, see your workbook, by Gunning, both use sentence length as a key factor in measuring how easy or difficult a passage of writing is to read. So keep those sentences short. But how? Here are some suggestions. Clauses beginning with but or and can be punctuated as separate sentences. Here's an example. Supervisors usually know if any significant gambling activity is taking place, and by surveying their supervisors, management can discover whether any gambling activity is occurring on the premises. This 28-word sentence can be easily cut down to size by splitting it before the end, and in this example, by omitting that particular word. Supervisors usually know if any significant gambling activity is taking place, period. By surveying their supervisors, management can discover whether any gambling activity is occurring on the premises. Let's turn to another technique now. Dependent clauses have a subject and verb introduced by a subordinating conjunction like because, when, and if. Split long sentences with these clauses by deleting the subordinating conjunction. This turns the dependent clause into one that can stand alone as a sentence. In addition, add an appropriate connective to the remaining sentence. Sounds horribly complicated, doesn't it? Oh, shucks. Just watch how easy it is. Because some employees are falsifying their records by indicating that they have received a degree from a college, companies would often be wise to request verification by letter or telegram asking the institution for their college credentials. Now to apply the suggestion. Eliminate that subordinate conjunction because, making the dependent clause a sentence. Some employees are falsifying their records by indicating that they have received a degree from a college. Now, add a connected therefore to the remaining sentence. Therefore, companies would often be wise to request verification by letter or telegram asking the institution for their college credentials. In addition to keeping sentences short, you should clarify your writing by relying on subjects capable of doing the action expressed in the verb. Subjects should be people whenever possible. Here's what I'm talking about. Determination of the sales policy should take place at the managerial level. Now ask yourself, who does what in this sentence? We really don't know who is the subject, the doer. But if we revise the sentence, look at how much clearer the idea is. The manager should determine the sales policy. Let's see whether you can handle one. The refusal of the employee's change vacation plan by the supervisor was surprising. Attack this sentence by asking yourself, who did what? Then go to work on the rest of the sentence. This one is tricky, but if you worked hard, you might have come up with, the supervisor surprisingly refused the employee's change vacation plan. Note how much clearer and more direct the revision is. The point is to write or revise your sentences so that people, the doers, the movers, the agents, are the subjects. All right, once you've taken care of the subject, you're not finished. To write clearly, you should keep the subject close to the verb, allowing nothing to come between those good buddies. Or if you don't watch them carefully, they can split. Take a look. Some employees, viewing periodic work samplings as an illegal management device, have opposed this practice. Note that readers have to juggle the subject, some employees, in one part of their minds, while they wait for the verb, have opposed, which is interrupted by the phrase, viewing periodic work samplings as an illegal management device. You can clarify the sentence by moving the subject and verb together, either at the beginning of the sentence or the end, like this. Some employees have opposed this practice, viewing periodic work samplings as an illegal management device, or viewing periodic work samplings as an illegal management device, some employees have opposed this practice. Just as long as you keep the subject-verb friendship together, whether at the beginning or the end, you'll be writing more clearly than if you split this pair. Now, you try one. The company, to determine net gains during the 2-year project in Chicago, kept a running account of each division's costs and savings. How'd you do? Hope you got that subject and verb together. You might have done so by switching that interrupting phrase, to determine, etc., to the front or rear, like this. To determine net gains during the 2-year project in Chicago, the company kept a running account of each division's costs and savings. And naturally, as long as company and kept keep company together, you could turn the sentence around, beginning with, the company kept a running account, etc., which would be followed by to determine, etc. As you can see, you can switch the interrupting element to the beginning or the end of the sentence. And now, before we switch to talking about the paragraph, let's end our discussion of sentences by reviewing the 3 ways to clarify them. 1, keep sentences short. 2, try to use people as subjects. 3, keep subject and verb together. There's another way to clarify sentences that also helps in clarifying paragraphs. I refer to transitions. These words, phrases, and sentences link sentence to sentence and paragraph to paragraph. Each sentence or paragraph is a unit, an island, so to speak, that must be attached to what precedes it. Sometimes such words as synonyms, pronouns, or demonstratives, like this, these, and those, connect sentences and paragraphs. Sometimes we use transitional words and phrases to link these units. Let me show some of them to you. If you're going to be adding a point, you might use one of these. And, also, in addition, furthermore. But suppose you want to indicate an opposite direction, then you might use any of these markers. But, however, nevertheless, though. For concluding, there are others. So, therefore, consequently, as a result. Other transitional words and phrases are listed in the workbook. Now, let's examine how they're used. Instead of moving all the stock to the new store, she decided to hold a bargain sale. On Sunday, she selected and marked down the items, giving discounts ranging from 40 to 60%. Note that we don't have a serious problem with these sentences because they both deal with a single event, the sale, and with the same subject, she. However, and I smile because I myself use the transitional word however there, however, the second sentence reveals an action that results from the first or concludes from it. So we could use a concluding marker. Instead of moving all the stock to the new store, she decided to hold a bargain sale. Therefore, note what the transition therefore does. It prepares you for what follows by signaling that the sentence will present some result of her decision to hold a bargain sale. Thus, the transition therefore closely links these sentences together by showing this relationship. Transitional words work the same way in linking paragraphs, but sometimes you may want to use a phrase summarizing what you have discussed previously, like this. Having pointed out what quality circles can accomplish, we have indicated their importance. Here the phrase, having pointed out what quality circles can accomplish, sums up the previous discussion, linking this sentence to the preceding one. Just as a phrase can link sentences or paragraphs, so a sentence can be used as a transition, usually to link paragraphs. Often these sentences are what I refer to as two-headed, part of them looking backward, the other part looking forwards. Having discussed the first step in decision-making, the diagnosis of the problem, let us turn now to the second, finding the best solution. Note the wonderful signals here. The first part of the sentence summarizes what has preceded. The second part signals what lies ahead. Together, they enable readers to more clearly understand what you are writing. So think of your writing as consisting of a chain of paragraphs, each of which must be linked to the previous one. And within these paragraphs are smaller chains of sentences that also must be linked. If a link is missing, readers must supply it. Placing this burden on readers increases their work, decreases the clarity of your writing, and reduces its effectiveness. Therefore, use transitions. Now, if I may, let me use one of those two-headed transitions myself. Here goes. Up to this point, I've been talking about using words, sentences, and transitions to make your writing clearer. But you can also do so not through linguistic devices, but through visual ones. A well-drawn chart, table, or graph is often worth many words. Whenever you can incorporate a visual aid in your work, do so, because it's an effective way to present material, particularly statistics. But realize it does not replace the written word. You should still refer to the table, graph, or chart, pointing out what is important or explaining how to interpret the data. Now, similar to using visual aids is a technique that I refer to as listing. In giving instructions or making points, number and write each on a separate line whenever possible. This spacing makes the ideas clearer for readers. Note the differences. Among favorable financial developments during the past year were an increase in earnings from $2 to $2.35 a share, a dividend increase from $1.70 to $1.82, a 14% rate increase, and the improvement in our first mortgage bond credit rating. Notice how much clearer these developments are when listed. I'm going to let you read this for yourself. Finally, to write clearer paragraphs, keep them short. Short paragraphs look more attractive and inviting to readers. They offer numerous resting places on the page, so readers can pause, gather strength, and then move ahead. Advertising writers best exemplify this technique in large newspaper ads, many of which contain single-sentence paragraphs to make them more attractive. Newspaper and magazine writers also heed this advice, especially because of their narrow columns of print. So follow the ways of these professional writers. Realize that long paragraphs are fatiguing and difficult. Short ones are attractive and inviting. On revising your first draft, keep an eye on the length of your paragraphs. If any run about 8 or more sentences, see whether you can divide them into smaller ones. Now, with these words about transitions, visual aids, listing, and short paragraphs, I've completed my suggestions about writing clearly. Now I'd like you to try your hand at this final examination based on the points I've made about words, sentences, and paragraphs. First of all, clarify each of the following 3 sentences by improving the selection of words. 1. At the commencement of next month, we will terminate all overtime work. 2, overtime costs last year increased significantly. 3, 3, we could compensate for these expenses if we could obtain an increment in our rates. Ready or not, let's see how you did. In the first sentence, you might have used shorter words for commencement and terminate, such as beginning and end, making the sentence read, at the beginning of next month, we will end all overtime work. If you change both words, give yourself 2 points. And if you did something about significantly in the next sentence to make it more specific, then give yourself another point. You might have changed the sentence, for example, to read, overtime costs last year increased 75%. And in the last sentence, you should have used simpler words for compensate and increment. Here's how I did it. We could make up for these expenses if we could obtain an increase in our rates. Give yourself 2 points for changes like those two. And if you didn't get 5 points in this section on words, then perhaps you can compensate, make up for your score in these sentences involving problems of sentence clarity. 1, the appearance of the new manager before the committee was on April 27th. Two, production of a redesigned product owing to a shortage of parts will not begin until next month. 3, because employees were not shown how their jobs contributed to the achievement of company goals, many people working on the assembly line were either uninterested in performing their assignments carefully or felt that their work was so unimportant that it made little difference how it was done. Now, because that sentence was so long, we're going to show it to you again. All done? Then away we go to sentence 1, where you should have made the new manager the subject of the sentence like this. The new manager appeared before the committee on April 27th. And in the second sentence, you should have moved the interrupting phrase, owing to a shortage of parts, either to the beginning or the end of the sentence. Here it is at the beginning. Owing to a shortage of parts, production will not begin until next month. If you got both of those, give yourself 2 points. And if you broke the third sentence into 2 sentences, give yourself 2 points. Into 3 sentences, you get 3 points. Here's one way of doing it. Employees were not shown how their jobs contribute to the achievement of company goals, period. Therefore, many people on the assembly line were uninterested in performing their assignments carefully, period. Or they felt that their work was so unimportant that it made little difference how it was done. You might have scored 5 points here on sentences and 5 previously on words for a grand total of 10. But I think you were grand if you total 7 or above. If you did, go on to the exercises about the paragraph in the workbook, and remember, keep your writing as clear as the picture on this television set.
Open your mind to an exciting new experience in learning. The Mind Extension University. An exclusive and entertaining offering from your basic cable service, the Mind Extension University is a challenging and convenient way to earn college credit in the comfort of your home. Courses are available now. To find out more, call 1-800-777-MIND. The Mind Extension University. Open your mind to your future.
Let's see. Here's that report I've been waiting for about the analysis of the new production method. The implementation of third-generation programming techniques was monitored for a 6-month period, during which the behavioral indices extraneous to the time phase concepts were analyzed relative to their functional interdependence of variable role concepts. Factors extrapolated from the datum, alluding to but not implicit in the contingency organizational systematized process, were considered as being incompatible with the integrated balanced approach dictated by the capability for flexibility necessitated by the continuum of potentially dissatisfying factors. What's all that about? Well, here's something. The new production method has the potential to prove beneficial to the reduction of costs that are incurred in the process of production. And here it says something else, but I don't know what it says. I don't know why those people can't learn to write clearly and concisely. I just haven't the time to read all this garbage. That's happened to you, hasn't it? You've gotten letters, memos, and reports that have annoyed the out of you. Why then, when you sit down to write, don't you remember the golden rule? Not that gold rules, but that you should write unto others as you'd like them to write unto you. And if you did, you'd realize how wordiness can irritate your readers, causing them to lose not only their respect for you, but to lose their comprehension of what you've written. That makes you a two-time loser. So remember, few writing weaknesses are as damaging as wordiness, and few qualities of effective writing are as important as conciseness. Now, by writing concisely, I don't mean that you have to write briefly, but you do have to write without waste. You do have to eliminate excessive words. Here's what I mean. Omit each and every word for which you do not have any use. That's what I want you to do, but let's state it concisely. Omit useless words. That's much better, isn't it? I've reduced the original statement of 13 words to 3 words, a savings of 77%. Conciseness in writing involves the same kind of economy that you achieve in your business when you eliminate unnecessary trips, operations, inventories, and expenses. So we're trying to eliminate waste and increase efficiency in your writing, just as you do in your work. And that's what I mean by writing concisely. What makes me think your writing is wordy now? Well, I may be wrong, but I'd be willing to bet that not only is your writing verbose, but that you're a master or mistress at wordiness. Subconsciously, you become an expert over the years at padding. While from time to time padding may be in style in clothes, the natural look is preferred in writing. Let me show you how your padding style started. Mrs. Scott, or was Mrs. Johnson your teacher, had given you an assignment to write about your favorite relative, or was it your summer vacation, in 250 words. There you sat and twisted and struggled to write that composition. Every once in a while, after you'd written a sentence or two, you'd stop, carefully count the words, and pencil a figure in the margin. And you'd write on, and count on, and write again, and count again, until finally, after you'd counted, Eureka! You got to 250. With a cry of sheer ecstasy, you hurled your pencil in the air, grabbed your hat and glove, yelled to your mother, "I finished it, Mom," and ran out the front door, which slammed behind you, and joined the game. There were more compositions and longer ones, 300, 500, 1,000 words, all exercises in padding, packed with such phrases as, in this modern contemporary world of today, a 7-word bloated way of writing today. And so you taught yourself how to say in 7 words what you could say in 1, in several hundred words what you could say in much fewer. Until now you become so skilled at padding, it's going to be difficult for you to cut the fat out of your writing. But to write healthy sentences, we've got to trim it away. Here are 8 tips for verbal dieting. 1, eliminate who, which, and that. These words clutter up numerous sentences. Usually, but not always, they can be deleted, often with another word or two. Here's what I mean. George Wilson, who was a foreman in the main plant, was injured today. Now, let's cut out that word who and revise the sentence accordingly. George Wilson, a foreman in the main plant, was injured today. That's what I mean by eliminating unnecessary words. The revised sentence presents the idea simply, clearly, and efficiently. Next, let's look at the that in action. The stocks that I'm interested in are the utilities. Remove the that and save a word, but look at the sentence again and save several more. I'm interested in the utility stocks. We chopped that original sentence down from 9 words to 6, a 33 1/3% savings. It doesn't sound or seem like much, but you could write a 2-page memo instead of a 3-page one by affecting similar savings. One word of caution about that. Don't remove it after verbs referring to the senses, seeing, feeling, thinking, etc., because of possibly confusing readers. I heard that the secretary in the front office was getting married. In this sentence, the removal of that would momentarily confuse readers, suggesting that the writer has listened to the secretary instead of to some news about her marriage. So omit that, except after verbs referring to the senses. Now, let's turn to the most dangerous of the trio, which. Here's how it bloats sentences. The report, which was written last year, needs to be revised. Trimming off the which enables you also to get rid of was, leaving, the report, written last year, needs to be revised. I mentioned that which is the most dangerous of the trio because it pops up everywhere, often taking over sentences like dandelions do lawns. The report, which was written last year, is the one which should be revised, preferably by the sales division, which has some interesting ideas, which should be discussed. That's what can happen to your sentences unless you go on witch hunts. If you do, you can reduce that monstrous sentence from 28 to 20 words. The report, written last year, should be revised, preferably by the sales division, because its interesting ideas should be discussed. And now, let's discuss your interesting ideas about reducing this sentence. Many employees who are interested in obtaining a degree have signed up for the course, which is offered by the accounting department. Ready? Did you cut away that fat who and which, leaving something like this? Many employees interested in obtaining a degree have signed up for the course offered by the accounting department. If you did, good for you. And remember to keep hacking away at who, that, and which. You can't always eliminate them, but most of the time you can. Now, on to verbal diet tip number 2. Avoid anticipatory constructions. Instead of getting to the point quickly, we clutter up our sentences with unnecessary introductory phrases like it is, there is, and there are. In nearly all instances, these bloated substances detract from the strength of your sentences. Take a look. There are too many people taking extended coffee breaks. Cut off the there are, and you have a lean, tough, too many people are taking extended coffee breaks. Often, trimming away the fat anticipatory construction is more difficult. Note, it is possible that they will not sign the contract. You can reduce this sentence to either of these slimmer versions. Possibly they will not sign the contract, or they may not sign the contract. Let's see what you can do with one of these fatzos. It is the decision of the director to cancel the order. All right, it's not simple. Here's the answer. The director decided to cancel the order. Did you get it? Good. And do you realize that you've reduced the sentence from 11 to 7 words, a savings of 36%, with those 4 omitted words? How'd you like to drop 4 pounds that easily? And just as you should stop nibbling before meals, so you should eliminate these unnecessary constructions that come before the main parts of sentences. So eliminate it is, there is, and there are. And now, let's look to diet tip number 3. Change ION words. Alexander Pope, a great English poet, once wrote, "Words are like leaves, and where they most abound, much fruit of sense is rarely found." And that's usually true in business, industrial, government, and professional writing. And what abounds the most is a habit I've named ION-itis, a piling up of ION-ending words. Listen to them clog up communication. It is my intention to give favorable mention and other declarations of approbation to the suggestion about the implementation of the recommendation mentioned in the communication about the reevaluation of the information revealed at the instigation of an investigation into allocation of reservations for parking situations. How'd you make out? Could you understand it? And between the two of us, doesn't it sound just like what you get so often in the mail? Now, let's take a look at a short sentence to see ION-itis at work. It was his conviction that information provided to staff would lead to a reduction in the duplication of copies. Now, if we get rid of this sickening ION habit that lards our sentences with fat, we have a strong statement like this. He was convinced that informing the staff would reduce the copies duplicated. Let's see you trim a fatty. The manager made a recommendation that new employees should be given an invitation to join the credit union. See how easy it is? Just change those ION words into shorter, stronger verbs, and you have improved sentences like the following. The manager recommended that new employees be invited to join the credit union. By changing made a recommendation to recommended and should be given an invitation to be invited, you've melted pounds off that sentence and you're ready for dieting tip number 4. Eliminate pesky prepositions. Prepositions are sneaky little word calories, always trying to fatten up sentences. If you're not careful, they'll bloat everything you write. Now, most sneaky of all is of, but you've also got to keep an eye out for in, on, to, by, and with, as well as the others. Here's how they pad sentences. The decrease in profit margins is of great concern to leaders of business. See that sneaky of appearing twice in the sentence? And observe also the in and to. Let's cut away all that clutter, leaving decreased profit margins greatly concern business leaders. Now, often these prepositions will appear in phrases that will swell your sentences to balloon size. They'll just overwhelm you. So be on your guard for such common ones as in regard to, with regard to, in the event that, in reference to, in view of the fact that, due to the fact that, for the reason that. See for yourself what they can do. Now, here's an easy sentence for you to work on. He wrote me in regard to the price. By cutting down the prepositional phrase to a single word, you should come up with, he wrote me about, or regarding the price. Now, try one that's much more difficult. In view of the fact that our expenses had increased, profits dipped slightly in the third quarter. Ready? Did you get rid of that overweight phrase, in view of the fact that? I simply changed it to because. And I also eliminated the in, although that's optional. Because our expenses had increased, third quarter profits dipped slightly. You can see that the weight of that sentence dipped considerably thanks to reducing and eliminating pesky prepositions. And now to diet tip number 5. Cut out repetition. Unnecessary repetition occurs in 2 forms, both fattening. The first involves doublets, expressions of repetitious words that may have come from legal writing. You'll recognize such stout souls as each and every, first and foremost, willing and able. And then there are words implied in other words, as in such expressions as true facts or future plans. Are there facts that are not true or plans that are not future? Of course not. But in this way, sentences become overweight from repetition. Now, what can you do to remove the fat from this sentence? The end result of the report is that it presents a full and complete account of the project's final outcome. Ready? Did you prune away those repetitious phrases, the end result, full and complete, and final outcome? If so, you should have come up with something like this. The result of the report is that it presents a complete account of the project's outcome. If you reduce those 3 repetitions, give and convey to yourself, just give yourself a big hand, and let's dash on to diet tip number 6. Delete deadwood. Now, I'm willing to admit to you that this is a miscellaneous category for all sorts of unnecessary words or phrases that don't fit under the other diet tips. Quite often they include such general terms as the following: time, shape, field, color, nature, matter, number, manner, way. Here are some examples. He took 2 hours in time to complete the job. The new employee is brash by nature. He spoke in a sarcastic manner. As you can see, we don't need the references to time in the first sentence, to nature in the second, or to manner in the third. Here are the thinner revisions. He took 2 hours to complete the job. The new employee is brash. He spoke sarcastically. Now let's see what you can do with this sentence. Although he had a degree in the field of marketing, The field test was a matter of uninterest to him because of the hurried way it was conducted. Now hack away at that deadwood and get rid of those empty, fatty, general nouns. Ready? You should come up with something like this. Although he had a degree in marketing, the field test was uninteresting to him because it was conducted hurriedly. By removing such general nouns as field, matter, and way from the first sentence, we reduced the second by 8 words or 28%. Not bad for a few seconds' work. So take aim at deadly deadwood and get that form of fat out of your sentences. And now let's get on to diet tip number 7. Get to the point quickly. Let me show you what I mean. Remember when you rode away to the company to find out whether you could buy a new part for your old toaster? And then you finally heard. Last. We are in receipt of your letter dated, etc., 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 etc. We wish to thank you for writing the electric toaster company about your electric toaster. We are glad to learn that you've been enjoying this toaster for the past 15 years and that you'd like to continue using it. Many of our customers have written letters saying they have found our toaster as good as new after 20 years, so there is no reason why. And so, if you'll send us the serial number of your model, we'll let you know promptly whether we can send you the part. Oh. Now, of course, that's terribly exaggerated to make the point. But you've all read letters and memos and reports that just never seem to get to the point. Aggravating, aren't they? Well, don't you be guilty of it. Eliminate all those unnecessary words that readers don't want to hear. Tell them what they want to know as quickly as possible. In other words, get to the point quickly. Which brings us quickly to our last verbal dieting tip. Omit unnecessary information. Benjamin Franklin has written about a hatter who decided to go into business for himself. He needed a sign for his shop, so he wrote out the wording, John Thompson, hatter, makes and sells hats for ready money. In addition, he wanted a hat drawn on it. One of his friends pointed out that hatter was unnecessary because of the words makes hats. Another suggested eliminating makes because customers weren't interested in the making of the hats, but only that they were for sale. A third friend asserted that for ready money was irrelevant because there was no selling on credit. Consequently, the only words left were John Thompson sells hats, along with the picture of a hat. And then they realized that sells was unnecessary because no one would expect hats to be given away. And why leave the word hats if there was a drawing of one? The sign over the shop read, John Thompson. Obviously, you can't eliminate as many words as John Thompson did, but you can go over your first draft, asking yourself whether every word, every sentence, every paragraph, and every page is necessary. If not, get rid of it. It'll hurt. It's as painful to eliminate words as it is to discard old items in your basement or attic. But you've got to get rid of unnecessary words. To see whether you can get rid of unnecessary words, rewrite the following sentences, eliminating the wordiness. There is a catalog which gives a complete listing of all the parts that we have in stock. Finished? You should have eliminated the anticipatory there is, the which, and the that, as well as other words made unnecessary by these deletions. The result, a catalog lists all the parts we have in stock. If you omitted the 3 words previously mentioned, give yourself 3 points. I don't think complete or completely should remain because all expresses the same idea. You might also want to omit "we have," using "our stock" instead. But these are options. Give yourself 1, 2, or 3 points according to the 3 items first mentioned. Now, try this sentence. There are certain factors which should be taken into consideration in the location of the new plant. Already, here's what I came up with. Certain factors should be considered in locating the new plant. This was a 4-point sentence. One for omitting the "there are," another for "which," a third for changing consideration into "considered," and a fourth for turning the "location of" into "locating." And now, here's another sentence. In response to the inquiry from you, our information about employment is handled by our office in New York. This one shouldn't trouble you. Ready? Did you get this? In response to your inquiry, our employment information is handled by our New York office. This sentence involved removing 3 prepositions, deleting "from" in "from you," and making it "your inquiry," deleting "about" in "about employment," and making it "employment information," and deleting "in" from "in New York," and making it "New York office." If you change those 3, give yourself 3 points, 2, 2 points, and 1 point. All right, if you haven't done too well so far, or even if you have, here's another one for you to slim down to size. Some of the people merely gave an answer to the questions on the questionnaire and let it go at that. This one's tricky. Think about it. Ready? Here's the answer. Some people merely answered the questionnaire. If you eliminate the "of" before people, either the questions or the questionnaire, and omitted the repetitious and let it go at that, give yourself 3 points. And if you realize that you could change "gave an answer" to "answered," give yourself a bonus point. Now, add up all your points. If you receive 10 or more, bully for you. And remember, in your writing too, 1, eliminate "who," "that," and "which." 2, avoid anticipatory constructions. 3, change ION words. 4, eliminate pesky prepositions. 5, cut out repetition. 6, delete deadwood. 7, get to the point quickly. 8, omit unnecessary information. There they are, 8 ways for you to slim down and shape up your sentences. Now let me leave you with a wise statement by the great philosopher Schopenhauer. If words are heaped up, the thoughts become more and more obscure. A word too much always defeats its purpose. And because I don't want to defeat my purpose, I'd better leave now.
Presenting an exciting and exclusive new addition to your basic cable service, the Mind Extension University. Earn college credit in the comfort of your own home. Study the arts, sciences, business, history, economics, and more. Subjects range from the social studies and humanities to economics and science. For information and registration details, call 1-800-777-MIND. The Mind Extension University. Open your mind to your future.
Did you ever notice that every single time someone asks you how many foot-pounds are in 642 kilowatt hours, it takes you, oh, maybe a minute or two to think of the answer?
What?
You know, that happened to me just the other day.
Huh?
Martha, we're kidding.
Oh.
But the point is, though, you know, there are so many ways to measure things that nobody could possibly remember them all, or nobody would want to. Beyond the ones that we just use every day, you just simply have to look them up. Now, I want each of you to have one of these little reference books, all right? Would you pass these around, please? Now, this little book contains several pages of conversion tables, and you can go from one unit of measures to the other. Now, it also has several common formulas and examples of how to use them.
This will be helpful.
Yes, but for this class, I want you to have one conversion chart that you can carry around in your head.
You know, Frank, I don't have any problem when it comes to the common measurements like feet in a mile or quarts in a gallon, but sometimes I just can't remember how to get from one to the other.
And that is exactly why you need one formula to do it all.
Just one formula?
Well, let's have a go at it. Now, here is one conversion chart that everybody knows. 1 foot equals 12 inches. Sue, can you make a fraction out of that?
Well, it could be 1/12.
You mean like this?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I am sure you all know all of the meanings for this expression. If this means 1 foot equals 12 inches, then what does this mean?
Well, 3 feet equals 36 inches.
And this?
4 feet equals 48 inches.
It's a simple proportion.
Sure it is. Well, I got through proportion. I guess I'll get through this.
You know, if the world has been looking for a system for converting one standard measure to another, this is it, proportion. And it has more applications than you can possibly imagine at first. Now, suppose you wanted to convert gallons to quarts. Now, look at this.
Would you write that 1/4?
Yep. And then you would be set up to find out all you would ever need to know about that relationship. Now, suppose I had 75 quarts. How many gallons?
You'd put the unknown, I mean what you're trying to find, gallons over 75.
You mean like this?
Right.
Uh-huh. All right, now somebody tell me in plain English what this means.
Well, that means that if 1 gallon is equal to 4 quarts, then a certain number of gallons would be equal to 75 quarts. All you got to do is cross multiply and, you know, you got it. Almost, just about.
Now what?
Well, you'll have to divide both sides of the equation by 4.
Like this?
Right.
Uh-huh. All right, now what is the one important tool, one important thing to remember when you use this tool?
Well, you've always got to put the same measure in the same place in the fraction.
Now, what do you mean by that?
Well, if you put gallons above the line in the first fraction, then it has to go above the line in the fraction you're converting it to. Did I say that right?
Well, I understood it perfectly. How about the rest of it? Yeah? All right, well, we'll work a few more of these, all right? Now, just remember what Sue said.
What did you say? Put the same kind of measure in the same place in both fractions.
All right? How many ounces are in 7 pounds? Well, you're all doing very well. Now, regardless of what the numbers seem to say, do the same thing. How many miles are in 880 yards?
But I don't even know how many yards are in 1 mile.
But you can look it up.
Here it is. There are 1,760 yards in a mile.
Great. So then I'll write the original fraction as 1 over 1,760.
That's it.
Okay. There aren't any miles in 880 yards.
Really?
Well, look, I get 1760x equals 880. So then what?
Well, you do the same as before. You divide both sides by 1760.
Okay.
1760x divided by 1760 is x. 880 divided by 1760 is 1/2.
Oh, you're right.
880 is a half a mile.
So, you see, it works for fractional conversions as well. Now, you perfect this system, and you've got a winner.
It'll change some things between the two systems, too, won't it?
2 systems? What's he talking about?
Well, we've only been talking about the English system so far. There is the metric system, too. And the measures for length, width, and volume can be converted from English to metric and vice versa by using proportions. For instance, 2.2 pounds is equal to 1 kilogram. Now, if I set it up like this, then I can figure out all of the pound-kilogram problems.
Well, let's do one.
All right?
Okay.
All right. How many pounds are in 56 kilograms?
I get 123 2/10 pounds. You know, Frank, since I've been in this apprenticeship training program, I've been doing a lot of measuring. I found out that measure is pretty easy as long as you stay in the same system. It's when you go from the English to the metric or in the other direction that you can run into trouble.
I think that's true. A lot of people are fearful of metric, but if you use only that language, it's very simple because it's decimal. Well, maybe we'll have a chance to discuss this system later.
You know, I've got an exception to the proportion system. Temperature.
Right, right. To go from Fahrenheit to centigrade, you have to have a special formula. But it's right here in this little book. Most people don't bother to remember it. They just look it up whenever they need it.
As long as we're talking about measuring, you know what I think would be really helpful?
What's that?
When I go to a store and I see that they're having one of these big discounts, I can't tell if I'm getting a good deal or if they're just ripping me off.
I know the feeling. You all familiar with it? Can you give us an example?
Yeah, the other day I was buying some shampoo. Now, my brand always sells for $1.09, but the store brand cost only 89 cents, so...
Okay, now that's a start. Does anybody want to ask Nancy a question?
Yeah, were the bottles the same size? I mean, did they hold the same amount of shampoo?
I think so.
Well, but then you still don't know about quality. I mean, I'm pretty fussy about the shampoo I use.
You know, Martha's got a good point. If they're equally good, then the store brand is cheaper, provided they're the same concentration.
Well, then you're worrying about quality, but I'm talking about more than that.
Okay, what else?
Well, they advertise this large economy size. Now, it costs more than the smaller size, but it has more shampoo.
Well, at least in that situation, you know about the quality.
Well, now,
Yeah.
this is a good discussion, but we need to know some other things in order to do a comparison.
Well, if you knew the sizes of both bottles, you could work it out.
How, Sue?
Well, if the $1.09 bottle was 8 ounces and the sale item was 12 ounces, I'd work it like a proportion.
Well, come up here and show us.
Oh, okay. Well, you could set it up, thank you, like this. 8 over $1.09 equals 12 over X, the unknown.
Does she have it set up right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, and... Okay.
So, what does that tell us?
Well, it tells us that 12 ounces for $1.64 is the same value as 8 ounces for $1.09.
So, what advice could we give to Nancy?
Well, if the sale price is less than $1.64, then for 12 ounces, then she should go right out and buy that bargain.
Do you ever suspect these stores of putting the same item into a larger package and then charging an even greater unit price?
Oh, yes. Listen, I know they do. I went into the store the other day to buy some coffee, and I found this real good can of coffee, 2-pound can, for $6.40. Now, the store was having a super sale, so they said, on a 3-pound can at $9.87.
So, what did you do?
Well, I divided it into pounds. I bet you had your calculator with you. Why, sure.
You know, I think the one thing that Martha has learned from this class is to always have her calculator handy.
Listen, anyway, this 2-pound can, I found out it cost $3.20 a pound. So then I divided $9.87 by 3, and I found out that it cost $3.29 a pound, and that is 9 cents a pound higher.
Oh, no. Well, you can figure out the unit cost, as Martha did. That's the cost per pound. Or you can do it by proportion, as Sue did. But either way, it is a good idea to do comparison shopping. Well, that's all for this time. Oh, I've made up some worksheets for you on measure. You can pick them up as you leave, all right?
Frank, there's been this nasty rumor going around that you're going to give us a big test in a week or two. Is there anything to that?
Well, no, I don't want to commit myself. But can you all measure Todd's fish yet?
We don't want to measure Todd's fish.
Well, you had better ask him about it. Now, that's all I'm going to say. You can threaten me, you can torture me, my lips are sealed.
Well, I don't remember anything about it, do you? Forget about it.
Hi. You should have learned in this scene that proportion can be used to convert one unit of measure to another. Now, here's the way it works. If you know that 1 foot equals 12 inches, a fraction can be made. Or another way to consider it is a ratio of 1 to 12. Once this relationship is set up, all conversions involving feet and inches are possible. For example, to answer the question, how many inches are there in 53 feet, you say 1 is to 12 as 53 is to some number. Then, by cross multiplication, you get 636. There are 636 inches in 53 feet. Note that as this problem is set up, like units are the same place in the fraction. Feet, feet, inches, inches. After you have done several examples, it is a very natural system. Of course, there are shortcuts, but if you are in doubt, this way of converting measures always works. Here are some units in their lowest terms. Oh, by the way, do you remember Todd's fish problem? Head, 9 inches. Body equals head plus 1/2 tail. Tail equals 1/2 head plus body.
What in the world are you up to? You ever notice when they deliver lumber, they always put the 2x4s where the plywood ought to be and the plywood where the 2x4s ought to be?
Yeah, that's the way it goes. Can I help you with some of this stuff?
Well, you can supervise if you want to.
Man, this is going to be some addition.
Yeah, I think we'll like it. See, what I'm going to do is take out that window, put a glass door in there to the rest of the house. Then we're going to have a vaulted ceiling.
Oh, that's nice.
A brick fireplace right over here.
You know, I wish I could fix up our house a little.
You know anything about bricks?
Well, my uncle was a bricklayer. I used to help him when I was a kid. I remember a little about it.
Well, that wall is going to be all brick.
Oh, that will be nice. How much is all this going to cost you anyway? A lot, I guess.
You know, I really don't know. Maybe you can help me figure this out. I've already picked out the bricks we want. Here, help me get a measurement of this space.
All right, you know, all we have to do is just figure the area, and
Right,
then
well,
that'll give you what you want.
It's going to be 10 feet across, and the bricks will go all the way to the ceiling.
All right, well, how big is a brick, then?
It's not just a brick you have to consider, though. It's a mortar, too, see?
I forgot about that. You know, my uncle used to say 7 bricks per square foot.
Put that down against the floor, if you
All
will,
right.
Todd.
There you go.
You got that tight?
Uh-huh.
Okay, 13 feet and 9 inches.
13.9, and you're going to
Right.
take it 10 feet in this direction.
Right, so to figure the area, I'll want to multiply 13 feet and 9 inches times 10 feet, right?
Right.
What is that they're always telling us about only multiplying the same kind of units?
Well, you have to express the 9 inches as part of a foot. You know, 9/12, that would be 3/4. I guess the best thing to do would be 75/100.
Right, so it would be 13.75 times 10.
Yeah.
Now they're both feet.
Right.
Ah, so how's that?
Yeah, you got it, 137.5 square feet.
Now, how many bricks did you say went in a square foot?
Well, now, if my memory serves me correctly, 7.
Okay, well, I can do that as a proportion. You could write it as 1 square foot is to 7 bricks as 137.5 square feet are to some number of bricks.
Right, or you could just multiply it by 7.
Right, be the same thing. Okay, 7 times 5.
How much are bricks these days, anyway?
The ones I want are $280 per thousand. 9. Okay, 962 and a half.
Now, there's a waste, too, you know. It takes half bricks to make a bind. So let's see, $280 per 1,000 bricks would be 28 cents each.
Okay, so we would multiply the 962.5 bricks times 0.28, right? Yeah, 10, 0, 0, 3, 2, 0, 3, 5, 7, 7, 10, 0, 3, 1, 5, 2, 3, 1, 19. Okay, $269.50.
That's it. That's not bad. You know, I'm going to love this room of yours.
I will, too, if I ever get the thing finished. Did your uncle teach you how to lay bricks?
He sure did.
I'll give you a job.
All right, you got it.
$1.37 an hour.
Hey, can't beat that. I can work a lot of hours.
Okay.
You know, Martha, I want to thank you for your help with this canning. I tell you, it would have taken me forever by myself.
I enjoy canning. It's so basic.
Look, how many jars of beans did we get done anyway?
Well, let's see. We've got 4 rows with 4 quarts and 4 pints in each row.
So that's 4 rows of 4. That's 16 quarts and 4 rows of pints. That's 16 pints. We got done 16 quarts and 16 pints.
We could have put it all into quarts. That's 2 pints to the quart. That's a 1-to-2 ratio.
Well, let me see. Now 1 quart equals 2 pints, so 16 pints equals 8 quarts.
That's it. So 16 quarts plus 16 pints would have given us 24 quarts altogether.
You know, we could have put them into gallon jars. We'd have 6 gallons.
Well, we could have put them all in a barrel. Can you imagine a barrel of beans?
Not to mention a hogshead or even a demijohn.
You can bet I'm not going to mention those. You know, I think I've been doing real well on measure ever since we started talking about it in class. I mean, like now, we converted from one measure into another and then multiplied. But I think addition and subtraction are a lot more difficult.
You know, I think so too, but you've always got to keep in mind your base unit.
Yeah, I know.
You know, I was working on those worksheets that Frank gave us, and I made a couple of discoveries.
Really? What?
Well, first, in adding measure, if you're careful to keep the units separated, you can use that proportion system to simplify it.
How do you mean?
Well, I know that worksheet is in here. Here it is. Now look. You add and you get 8 feet and 25 inches. Now, since I want to simplify 25 inches as feet, the proportion system works fine.
So that gives you 2 feet 1 inch, add it to the 8 feet, and your answer is 10 feet 1 inch.
Right.
Well, how about subtraction, though?
Well, it's only hard when you have to regroup. But I learned something about that, too. Look at this problem. Now, the book says to do it like this. Compare your 28 with 12. Then you decide that you need more minutes to subtract. Now you have an hour over here, call it 60 minutes. Add it to the 12, and then it's just a matter of subtracting the 28 from the 72 or 44.
Oh, so that's just like regular subtraction when you have to regroup, except that you use 60 instead of 10.
Right, but there is a simpler way.
What?
Well, you don't have to do any of that regrouping if you use signed number rules. Just subtract the 28 from the 12.
That's a negative 16.
Right, then you subtract 1 from 5 and you get 4. So the answer is 4 hours minus 16 minutes.
Oh, that's the same answer.
Well, yeah, but you still have to know that there are 60 minutes in an hour. It's just simpler for me to say 4 minus 16 minutes instead of going around and borrowing an hour and then breaking it up into minutes, and then adding and then subtracting.
Sue, you are remarkable.
I know.
Do you suppose anybody else knows about this?
You know, I don't know. You think I discovered it?
Do you suppose?
Just think, Martha. Pythagoras, Euclid, and Sue Bird, the great math trio.
I can see it now. Your name in lights.
Oh, yeah.
Or at least in a math book.
What you saw in this scene were problems of measure, much as they occur around us every day. Here's a diagram of the wall that Bill wanted to cover with bricks. Now, this is really a three-part problem. First, they had to determine the area of the surface of the wall. Then it was necessary to find out the number of bricks that it would take to cover it. The third step, once they had the other information, was to estimate the cost of the bricks. In the second part of the scene, Sue and Martha multiplied to get the number of jars of green beans they had preserved. Then they converted all of the canned beans to gallons. Remember, when adding measures, to keep like units in a column, much the same as when you're adding and subtracting decimals. In subtraction, much care must be taken when it is necessary to regroup. Here is an example of that process. Here is an example of Sue's shortcut. It's well worth exploring.
Bird residence.
Sue, this is Martha.
Oh, hi, Martha. How you doing?
Oh, I've got alligator problems. I belong to this club, and we make these toy alligators to send to children's hospitals, and I'm in charge of mailing them. Ugh.
So what's the problem?
The alligators aren't fitting into the mailing cartons, and I don't know what to do.
Well, that would be a problem.
Oh, come on, Sue. Can you come over? I'm really getting confused.
Okay, look, I'll be over there in a few minutes, okay?
Ah, great. Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot for coming over, Sue. I feel better already. Sorry, this place is such a mess. I've been working all morning on this.
Well, I couldn't resist trying to solve an alligator problem, so fill me in.
These alligators fit into these boxes here, and the boxes are 4 inches around the end and 24 inches long, and I got to mail 24 of them.
Well, what are you going to mail them in?
You see that big box over there? That's what I'm going to mail them in.
Oh.
It's 24 inches wide, 8 inches deep, and 4 feet long, and the boxes all fit into it just right.
So what's the problem?
The post office says it's too big.
Oh.
They measure something called length and girth combined, and the total of those two measurements can't be more than 108 inches.
Well, how do they measure the girth?
They measured it around the smallest dimension, you know, that way.
Okay, the perimeter.
Yeah, I guess. Anyway, the girth of that big box turns out to be 24 plus 8 times 2, which is 64. Then you add the length, which is 48 inches. You get 112 inches. Now, that is only 4 little inches more than what they'll allow.
Well, maybe you can make 2 packages.
But it seems silly to put it into 2 boxes when one will almost do. And besides, postage is so expensive. My club is not rich.
Well, maybe we could rearrange them so you can mail them.
Think so? But it's the same amount of stuff no matter how you rearrange it.
Where's your math packet? There's some stuff in it that might help.
It's around your someplace. Oh, here it is.
Ah, good. There's a page in there about perimeters and areas. Ah, got it.
Great. So what do I do?
Okay, well, first you're going to have to rearrange these little boxes.
Okay. Now, rearrange them how?
Okay, well, first you're going to have to pile them up 3 high.
Okay.
3 high.
Got that.
Okay, and now they're going to have to be 8 long.
Oh, yeah. Okay, but it still looks like the same size pile to me.
Well, it is the same size, but the surface may be different. Hey, why don't we measure the pile when it's stacked this way, okay?
That's a great idea. Okay. Now, it's still 24 inches wide.
Okay.
12 inches deep. And 32 inches long.
Okay, so then the distance around it, the perimeter, is going to be 24 plus 12 plus 24 plus 12, or 24 plus 12 twice. Let's see, and that is 72 inches. Well, let's see, that's girth in post office talk.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, we add that to the 32, and that makes the length of the girth and the length combined is 104 inches. Well, that's less than your 108-inch restriction.
It is. But I don't understand. I mean, how can you put the same amount of stuff into a smaller box?
Well, I think it says here that perimeter and area are related. Then it goes on to saying that the more nearly square a rectangle is, the greater the area in relationship to the perimeter.
Then what do you mean?
Well, remember the way you had the boxes arranged?
Yeah.
They were piled long and skinny. Now the way you have it is piled more like a cube, or as near as you can get, considering the shape of those alligators.
You think I'm going to be able to cut that box down to size?
Probably so.
Now, how did you know that that was going to work?
Well, I wasn't sure. But I do know that the shape of something does affect the area.
Oh, how'd you know that?
Do you remember when we were remodeling? Well, our utility room is 6 feet by 12 feet with a perimeter of 36 feet. And our bathroom is 9 feet by 9 feet. And that, too, the perimeter is 36 feet.
Yeah.
Well, are the rooms the same size?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, they're just a different shape.
No, that's what I thought. But when I decided to put molding around the edges of the room, the amounts were the same. But guess what happened when I wanted to tile my floors?
I give up.
Martha, that's not a guess.
They're not the same size.
Well, not the same size in area, but the utility room area, or shall I say, the total floor space, was 72 square feet. Now, that's 6 times 12. But the bathroom is still 9 feet times 9 feet.
So the bathroom's area is 81 square feet. The areas are different and the perimeters are the same. Boy, that seems really strange to me.
Well, I guess it proves that equal perimeters don't cause equal areas.
Yeah, that's just like this alligator problem now. I mean, when we rearranged it, we changed the perimeter, but we didn't do anything to the area.
Yeah, but in this alligator situation, we're dealing with the volume.
Right.
Do you think you can fix up this carton now?
Oh, sure.
Oh, good. I'm going to take off.
Sue, thanks a lot for coming over. I really appreciate it.
Oh, anytime. See you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Martha.
Did you hear those words? Length, width, perimeter, area, volume? Martha's problem with the alligators has to do with all those words. Let's look at the way the boxes were arranged before she called Sue. They were 2 boxes high and 12 long, 24 boxes in all. The perimeter of the end section, or girth as the post office called it, is 24 plus 8 plus 24 plus 8, or 64 inches. This can be thought of as 24 plus 8, 32 times 2, since 32 is halfway around the box. In this arrangement, the stack is 48 inches long. 64 plus 48 is equal to 112 inches, which is greater than the post office will accept. By rearranging the boxes so that they were 3 high and 8 long, the perimeter and length are now different, but the volume is the same. Look at this illustration. These figures have the same distance around them, yet the areas are different. Think about it.
Okay, right, students, put your books away. We're going to take the test that we studied for our history exam from Chapter 7 in your textbook. Yes, Bravita?
Does this test count on our report card grade?
Yes. All of your test scores are important because they reflect what you've done throughout the year. And if you study Chapter 7, then you should all be perfectly ready for the test.
All right. What was that guy's name? Colonel somebody. Or was it a general? I just don't remember.
I know that one. It's General Grant. He won the Battle of Gettysburg. This is easy.
What was that guy's name? Studied, really, I did. Gosh, I'm gonna flunk.
This is easy. I'm gonna ace this test. I remember everything I studied.
I don't know, Elizabeth. I've been over these figures 3 times and they're just not adding up. It's not my night. I've got a dinner engagement and I'm late already.
Doesn't it make you nervous, though? You know how precise Bob likes us to be with these figures.
I know how Bob is.
Excuse me, you two. Paul, listen, I need those latest figures on the Midwestern region. Do you have them ready for me?
This is a Bluefield project, right? For some reason, 13% sticks in my mind, but I can't remember whether that's the National or Midwestern. I've got them right in my office.
Elizabeth, as far as the new line goes, do you have your latest figures handy?
Sales are up 8% in the East. They're up 5% in the South. Unfortunately, they're down 3% in the Midwest. But our forecast shows they're going to go up 2% in the Midwest, so we should be fine.
Thank you. Good job. Paul, see me later.
Thanks, Bob. Gosh, I've got them right in my office.
We're all impressed by people who have great memories. The student who remembers all the important dates and facts for the big test. The executive who can readily recall the details of the latest merger. The actor who can master a Shakespearean soliloquy. If the truth be known, most of the people who seem to have total recall aren't any smarter than we are. But they were smart enough to develop good memories. Now you can master the same skills and have command of all the facts, figures, and information you choose. It's never too late to build a good memory, and that's exactly what we're going to do in this series. You'll learn the techniques for survival in the memory zone. Hello, I'm Alan Butkowski, and I'm going to show you how you can master those memory techniques. With a little work, you'll find that you can effectively retain all the information you choose and later recall that information, rather than just have it sit on the tip of your tongue. You'll also notice a new vitality in your imagination and creative skills. The system I'm about to present to you will dramatically improve your ability to organize, retain, and recall information quickly and accurately, even under pressure. It's going to take some effort and practice on your part. I'm not going to promise a miraculous instant memory program, but I will promise that if you stick with it, you'll enjoy quicker learning, longer retention, more confidence, and greater performance. I'll show you the how to remember things. Just what you remember is up to you. You'll be able to take these techniques and apply them to any task, no matter what your job. Many of the examples we use may not apply to your particular needs or interests, but remember, they're just that, examples. You can plug whatever information you want into the exercises. What we're teaching is technique, not the examples. I'm going to start with a test typically used by memory researchers so that you can evaluate your present memory skills. It will consist of remembering 20 unrelated objects. Listen to the items as I give them. Afterwards, you'll be asked to write down those objects in the same order that I gave them. Let's start with a ring, followed by bread, dart, lion, a hammer, card, barn, pie, scissors, fence, fork, bowl, rug, lawnmower, nail, brick, jacket, tire, and corn. Let's have one quick review. Ring, bread, dart, lion, a hammer, card, barn, pie, scissors, fence, hat, fork, bowl, rug, lawnmower, nail, brick, jacket, tire, and corn. Now write down all the objects you can remember in the order they were given. Well, how did you do? Most people only remember about 7 items. Very few people can recall 10 or more objects in their proper order. Now we're going to tackle another list of 20 items, but this time we're going to use a special strategy called chaining, or the chain technique. The object here is to link one item to the next by using clear images. With the chaining technique, you only have to remember one item. Then through linking, that one item leads to the next, and so forth. Sort of a mental domino theory. To make it work, you're going to have to use your imagination and your mind's eye. Picture each of the items connected to the next one. In our next exercise, we'll supply you some visualizations just to get you started. But these memory exercises work much better if you form your own images of familiar objects. For instance, if we were to use a car, picture your own car. By picking more personal items, you'll remember them more easily. Let's try another list. This time, open your mind's eye and enter your memory zone. First, we'll start with a shoe. Now, in your mind's eye, picture one of your own shoes. Make sure the image is clear. The second item is a tree, but this time, imagine the tree coming right out of the shoe we started with. Now picture money growing on the tree, lots of money, all denominations. Imagine a ladder leaning against the branches of money. And then a pig climbing the ladder. The pig is carrying a suitcase. Now imagine that suitcase opens and tomatoes come tumbling out. The tomatoes land on a huge cactus. Let's put a dress on the cactus. Now picture the dress swinging some golf clubs. And at the end of the golf clubs is a flag. The flag falls off of the golf clubs and drapes itself over a tent. The tent flap opens up, and from out of the tent comes a big bus. The bus runs right into a fire hydrant. The fire hydrant breaks open, and a stream of jewels pours out of the hydrant. The jewels land in a boat, and the boat is attached to a chain. The other end of the chain is tied to a desk. On top of the desk is a stapler. And finally, in the stapler is a supply of pens. It's kind of like that old song where the leg bone's connected to the ankle bone. Now review the entire chain in your mind's eye and recall the objects in the order they were given. Did you do better remembering this group? Now, if you can remember 20 unrelated items, think of what you can do with related material. Why was it easier to remember this list? It has to do with the chaining technique. The chaining technique is a very effective strategy because it employs two fundamental principles of learning: visualization and association. We form a clear image or visual of the object and then link it or associate it with the next image, which is in turn linked to the next one, and so forth. These two principles, visualization and association, are the basis for forming an effective memory. Employing both principles will improve your memory, your vocabulary, your creative thinking, and even your self-esteem. Let's look at one psychological model of our memory. The human memory has three separate warehouses. These are sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. When we're first presented with information, we pick it up through one or more of our senses. These sensory memory stores have a capacity to hold virtually all the information we gain from sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. But sensory memory is extremely transient. It can only hold information for a fraction of a second. Therefore, in order for us to hold on to information a little longer, we must transfer that information to our short-term memory. This is accomplished by associating meaning to the information and then focusing our attention on it. This process is illustrated by the cocktail party phenomenon. Remember the last time you were at a social gathering where there were numerous conversations going on all around you? All those sights and sounds continuously entered your sensory memory store and left very rapidly because they held no meaning for you and weren't worth focusing on. However, if you heard something at that party that was particularly meaningful to you, then you would focus attention on that information and incorporate it into your short-term memory. For example, if someone at the party mentioned something to do with your vocation, your hobby, your hometown, your name, or anything else that had significant meaning to you, you would automatically focus on that comment and it would become part of your short-term memory. Our short-term memories are a function of our conscious mind. And since we can only be aware of a limited amount of data at one time, our short-term memories are limited. In fact, they're limited in quantity to about 7 pieces of data and are limited in time to about 15 seconds. It's no wonder many of us have trouble remembering things. Now, long-term memory can be thought of as being part of the subconscious mind, which is concerned with storing information on a permanent or semi-permanent basis. Long-term memory is often referred to as our general knowledge base. The relationship between our short-term memory and our long-term memory is at least a two-way street. They both transmit and receive information. However, for most of us, this relationship is more like a cow path. I want to show you how to build it into a superhighway. Now, how do we do that? The information of the short-term memory is transferred to the long-term memory by a number of elaborate processes. In order to understand these processes and why they're so important, let's look at the organization of our brains. The human brain looks something like a big walnut, which is sectioned into halves. Each of these hemispheres looks remarkably similar to the naked eye, but there are definite functional differences between the two. From research, we know that the left side is logical, rational, reasonable, sensible, practical, sequential or linear, and verbal. The right brain, on the other hand, is visual, spatial, imaginative, creative, relational or associative, musical, and intuitive. These intelligences don't exist in isolation, but are combined and interrelated. In developing a good memory, we have to use the innate tools of both the right and left sides of the brain. Most of us don't use our brain's full potential. We don't often use visual imagery and associative processes in the service of our memory. These are right brain functions. They are tools we often neglect in the learning process. We want to teach you how to draw on these intuitive, creative tools to enhance your capacity for memory and learning. Now let's go back to our discussion of the elaborative processes available to us in our short-term working memory. These are visualization or imagery, repetition or rehearsal, association, and organization of information. Visualization is probably the single most important aspect of memory improvement. Studies have shown that groups of people who were given pictures of an array of items to remember consistently scored higher on memory tests than those who were given just word lists. Other research has shown that memories improve by seeing the objects themselves rather than just pictures of the objects. The important point here is that using vivid images will improve your memory of those objects. Developing your imagination and visual abilities takes some practice, but it's a necessary part of building your memory. We're going to examine the three most effective ways of using visual imagery in your associations. The first is action. Associate action to the object. Make it lively. Let's say you want to remember to buy a bag of dry dog food. Take that sack of dog food and give it action. Now, I want you to go into your mind's eye and stretch your imagination. You'll find you have almost unlimited options, as many as your creative imagination can provide. Let's start with the bag ripping open and spilling out all over the floor. Or picture the bag as big as your car and you're trying to get through the aisles with it. This may seem a silly exercise, but it's crucial for you to play with these images. These visualizations expand your creative imagination. You must learn how to exploit that imagination and then establish the habit of using it. This habit will greatly enhance your memory and will serve you in many other ways as well. Okay, we've given you just a few ideas for adding action to an object. The second way of enhancing your visual imagery is to add some interesting details to your object to make it more unique or special. Now, once again, play with that bag of dog food. Pretend it's in front of a funhouse mirror. With your mind's eye, see the bag stretched lengthwise so that it becomes long and skinny. Then stretch it widthwise so that it's short and fat. Now trim the bag as you would a Christmas tree. Put a dog's nose or wings or a studded collar around it. Remember, use whatever your mind's eye sees. If the images are novel and interesting, they'll be much easier to recall. The third and final technique is to give the item some quality of emotion, any emotion. For example, have the dog hungrily ripping open the bag, or picture how disgusted you'd be if your spouse served you a dog food dinner. Again, whatever seems amusing or memorable to you will work. It doesn't have to make sense. This is not an exercise in logic, but an exercise in creative imagery. Make your associations comical, unusual, or even sensuous. If you'll take just a few minutes each day while on the elevator or stopped at a traffic light, take this time to practice this visualization. It will soon become easy, even fun to do. At the same time, using any combination of action, interest, or emotion will enrich your imagery and increase your ability to recall. Let's give this one a try. You leave the house in the morning wanting to remember 3 tasks. 1, to buy dog food. We already have a pretty good idea how to do that. 2, to take our shirts to the laundry. And 3, to pay Joe the $3 we borrowed from him yesterday. Now, using one or more of the memory aids, action, interest, and emotion, think of how to visualize each task so that you remember all 3. Tomorrow, when you leave the house, test yourself. See if you can recapture the images you've created and remember the 3 tasks. Onward and upward. We've just talked about visualization. Now let's take a look at the process of association. Association plays a tremendous role in learning and memory. And in fact, all learning and memory involves some form of association to what we already know. This could be association of ideas or of mental images, as in chaining. We've all seen a domino chain where dominoes are set up in a predetermined pattern. Some of these patterns are so large they cover a gymnasium floor. The first domino is tapped, which sets off the chain. Our dominoes are images, mental pictures. Like the domino chain, one image triggers the next image, and so forth and so on. If 20 pieces of information are presented separately, you have to remember 20 independent segments of information. But when the 20 pieces of information are connected, they become one piece of information. By remembering the whole, you also remember the parts, and vice versa. Associating data, or linking it, is a very powerful strategy. What we're interested in is a way to put any information we want into our long-term memories and then retrieve that information at any future date. This brings us to our next elaborative strategy, repetition. Studies have shown that the amount of information that passes from short-term to long-term memory depends in part on how long this information is held in short-term memory. As we said earlier, short-term memory normally has a time limit of about 15 seconds. However, if we rehearse or repeat this information, it will remain in our short-term memory longer, and there will be a greater chance of it being transferred to our long-term memory bank. I'm sure we're all familiar with the famous rote repetition strategy, the process of simply repeating something over and over again and hoping that some of it gets stored in our long-term memory. This is the way we all learn the alphabet and the multiplication tables. Most of us have probably tried getting ourselves through school this way and found the practice only moderately successful. We never knew that there were alternative strategies to help us learn and remember, that using repetition with visualization and association greatly increases our capacity for total recall. In this program, we presented a basic model of the human memory, its sensory, short-term, and long-term stores. We talked briefly about the effectiveness of visualization, association, and repetition as techniques for memory enhancement. You're also now aware of one of the very basic strategies for memory enhancement, the chaining technique. This will act to springboard us to more useful strategies. Yes, it'll take some practice and imagination, but you can develop your memory to a greater degree than you ever thought possible. I'm Alan Butkowski. I hope you've enjoyed your first adventure into the memory zone.
Great. I don't know why they always complain about shopping. What could be easier? Let's see, what am I supposed to pick up? Oh, yeah, 3 bars of soap, no problem. What was that, 3 cans of soup? You can never have too much soup, I'll get some of each. And then there's tomato juice. What was that, tomato sauce? I'll get a can each. And I can't forget the floor wax. What's that wax paper I'm supposed to get? It can't cost too much to get both.
And at least I know I got to get birthday gifts for the triplets. It's Karen, Billy, and, well, at least I know the three of them.
Perhaps the first thing our friend should shop for is a pencil and some paper. His little excursion to the grocery store is going to be an expensive trip if he continues to walk through the wrong aisles of the memory zone. Hi, I'm Alan Butkowski. This time around, we're going shopping for another memory technique. This technique will help us with vocabulary words, both foreign and domestic, terminology, and lists, grocery lists, guest lists, any kind of list, even the names of all your kids. Well, we probably have a pretty good handle on the names of our family members, but I venture to say that all of us have found ourselves in a store only to scratch our heads trying to recall what we went in there for in the first place. Earlier, we talked about a memory technique called chaining. You remember, chaining is the linking together of items through visualization and association. Now we're going to learn another memory technique. It's called keywording. Keywording is used when we need to give visual qualities to words that don't naturally have them on their own. Often we need to remember words or phrases that are not concrete or tangible, but are abstract. This is when keywording is most effective. For instance, take the word honesty. It represents a quality, an abstract idea which is not easily visualized. Let's keyword it. What image can we find to trigger the word honesty? How about a mental image of Abraham Lincoln, old honest Abe? Actually, Lincoln has become a symbol for honesty. Banks use his image for their logos. So what we've done here is use a visual image to trigger an abstract idea. Another way to use this technique is to choose a keyword that is easily visualized and also rhymes or sounds like the word or name you want to remember. Let's say you need to remember the name of Claus Sluiter, a 14th century Dutch sculptor. You also need to remember his best-known work, which is The Well of Moses. Now, how can we do this by keywording? Okay, here goes. For Claus Sluiter, let's imagine Santa Claus saluting. For the work, we'll picture a well and Moses climbing out of the well holding the 10 Commandments. To get the total picture, we'll use the mind's eye to imagine Santa Claus saluting Moses climbing out of a well holding the 10 Commandments. So those two bearded fellows give us Claus Sluiter and his work, The Well of Moses. If you're really alert today, you may have noticed that what we just did with old Claus Sluiter was a combination of keywording and chaining. We selected words that sounded like those we needed to remember and chained them together with visual images. This allowed us to remember a chunk of information by visualizing one short scene. Let's give this technique another shot. Suppose I asked you to name the first 10 presidents of the United States, and I want them in chronological order. In order to accomplish this, we'll use a combination of the keyword technique and the chaining principles. Simple chaining won't work by itself because the presidents don't have strong visual properties by themselves. So we'll use a keyword for each to trigger the right name. The keyword, again, will act as a sound cue to the name we want to remember. If we started trying to chain Washington, Adams, and Jefferson without keywords, we'd have a difficult time. There's no effective visual link. Then we'd have to rely on rote memory. So let's try a chain of keywords. Now, in your mind's eye, picture a washing machine for Washington. For Adams, imagine a dam. Place the dam on top of the washing machine. Then put a chef for Jefferson on top of the dam. Medicine is a good keyword for Madison. So let's imagine the chef giving medicine to a man rowing a boat. A man rowing is a good keyword for Monroe. In the back of the boat is an adding machine for the second Adams. On top of the adding machine is a jack for Jackson. Now let's imagine the jack jacking up a van with a bureau in it. That's a good keyword for Van Buren. Now on top of the bureau is a sign. It's a hairy sign, so think of hair growing all over it. This will give us Harrison. And finally, picture a tie around the sign with a fishing lure stuck in it for Tyler. Let's stop for a second to review our bizarre image. First, picture a washing machine, then on top of it, a dam. Then, put a chef on the top of the dam. The chef is giving medicine to a man rowing a boat. In the back of the boat is an adding machine. On top of the adding machine is a jack. The jack is jacking up a van with a bureau in it. On top of that bureau is a sign with hair growing out of it. It's a hairy sign. Then around the sign, there's a tie with a fishing lure stuck in it. By decoding these keywords, we suddenly have a list of the first 10 presidents. Let's see how you did. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Jackson, Van Buren, Harrison, and Tyler. If you remember this visual story, you'll always know the first 10 presidents of the United States. Now let's look at some other uses for the basic keywording strategy. Keywording can be extremely useful in remembering word definitions, foreign vocabulary, or even technical terms. To use the keyword process, we follow 3 basic steps. First, we recode the word into a familiar mental image. Next, we recode the meaning of the word into a mental image. Finally, we combine both images into one interacting picture. To show you how easy this really is, we'll go through several examples. Let's begin with a simple English word like beset, which means to be bothered or harassed. So you can imagine a bee, one of the big ones. Now imagine that bee set in a place that was extremely bothersome or even frightening to you. How about your shoulder or your nose? Now you're beset with the problem of being stung. Now that you understand how keywording works, go to your mind's eye and try a few more for practice. Ostracize. The definition of ostracize is to exclude from a group. Picture in your mind's eye an ostrich, which sounds like ostracize. Imagine a large bird at a party with a lot of people around him. Everyone else is having a good time, but they're not paying much attention to the ostrich. They're even avoiding the bird on purpose. There you have a good image of the meaning of the word ostracize. Now let's try cartel. A cartel is a group of businessmen who conspire to create a monopoly. So what you're going to do with this one is imagine a car with a telephone in it. Thus we have cartel. Now let's make that image clearer and more lively. Make that car a long black limousine filled with businessmen in 3-piece suits. They're wheeling and dealing on all the phones. And let's put some money in their hands too. They can be even playing a Monopoly game at the table near the back seat. So we get the picture of a group of businessmen that are trying to form a monopoly over a particular market. And that's a pretty good image of the definition of cartel. I'm going to go through a series of vocabulary words with you and give you examples of keywording them. Just keep in mind that your own keywords will always work best for you. I just want to get you started. Okay, here goes. Mendacious means dishonest, falsehood, or characterized by deception, although not often intended to mislead. Mendacious sounds like mend dishes. Here we can see someone at a home or restaurant who drops a dish. And so they aren't found out or penalized. They're going to be a little deceptive and misleading. They're going to mend the dish, glue it together again, and put it back on the shelf. We can even see that person being questioned about who's responsible, and they deny their actions. This would key in dishonesty and falsehood. Hiatus. Now this sounds like the phrase, I hate this. A hiatus is a pause, gap, or lapse in continuity. For this, we could think of many good possibilities. One could be seeing a speaker who pauses and loses train of thought. He's saying to himself, I hate this. because of the lapse in continuity in his presentation. Another is to see a gap in your paycheck between the hours worked and the amount paid. If it's to your disadvantage, I'm sure you'll be saying, I hate this. Our next word is query, which sounds like inquiry. In fact, a query is an inquiry, or questioning, in order to resolve doubt or get authoritative information. So picture a lawyer querying an expert witness, inquiring about certain facts. Abhor is next in line, and it means to regard with extreme repugnance, to loathe, detest, or reject and hate. Abhor sounds like a boar, the wild pig. And as ugly as they look, you shouldn't have any trouble associating the word abhor with a boar. Next we come to turgid. It means swollen or distended, inflated. It can refer to the anatomy, like a swollen limb, or to a pompous or overinflated attitude or style. Turgid sounds a little like detergent. So we can see a box of detergent swelling up, or see someone drinking some detergent and swelling up. Ugh. Let's try platitude. A platitude is a dull, stale, or commonplace statement. Our key word will be platter. And we can see a platter filled with rolled up pieces of paper, like the one in Chinese fortune cookies. But they each reveal a commonplace or dull fortune. How about promulgate, which is to make known or announce officially and formally, a public declaration or proclamation. Here we can use the first syllable, prom. Now envision a formal high school or college prom, and as the couples line up to enter, someone at the door announces their names. So we get the idea of formality and announcement. The next word is sanguine. Sanguine is a cheerful, hopeful disposition, confident or optimistic. Our key word for sanguine will be sang. Our image will be someone singing in a cheerful or optimistic tune. How about galvanic? Galvanic is to have an electrifying, stimulating effect. Our key words would be gal and van. You could visualize a young gal with an electrically run van. You could also add to the picture by giving her an electrifying or stimulating personality. The last one, placate. It means to soothe by concession or appeasement. Play will be our key word. And a good image would be to see a parent appeasing or soothing their child by playing with them. You can see just how well keywording works with the English language, and it can work just as well for other languages. How about some Spanish? The Spanish word for egg is huevo, which sounds like wave. If we use wave as our key word, we can imagine a big wave at the beach washing in hundreds of eggs. Remember that your images don't have to be realistic, but they do have to be clear and vivid. The Spanish word cola means glue. Picture someone reaching for a cold bottle of cola. The person starts to drink, and suddenly he can't pull his lips off the bottle because it's filled with glue. The Spanish word cebolla means onion. We'll take the middle syllable of cebolla, which sounds like the English word boy. And you can see in your mind's eye a little boy eating an onion. Let's try one more, pato. That's Spanish for duck. We can use the keyword pot. You can imagine a duck flapping around in a pot, about to become duck soup. Keywording can also be used to remember and understand legal and medical terms. In legalese, the word proffer means the presentation of a document or instrument as evidence in court. The lawyer does this so the court can examine the evidence. The word profit sounds like proffer, so we can use that as our keyword. In your mind's eye, picture one of the Old Testament prophets in a courtroom. Imagine him unrolling a large scroll and showing it to everyone in the courtroom. There's our vivid image of the legal term proffer. Next, let's try quash, which means to cancel or annul. Quash sounds very similar to squash. You can see a judge in a long robe squashing a stack of legal papers, canceling or annulling the issue at hand. He or she could even be using a squash racket to do the squashing, just as long as the image is something which will be easily retained by your memory. I'd say you're almost halfway to passing the bar exam. Okay, let's get out of the courtroom for a while. The keyword system lends itself well to helping you learn Greek and Latin words used in medical terminology. Let's try gastro, which means stomach. Gastro sounds like gas, and you can see someone doubled over with stomach gas, and a mental picture would be complete. Path, as in pathology, is another term that is used commonly in medical terminology. Path means disease, and it sounds just like the path you walk along. So picture a winding, turning path with diseased people all along it. How about the suffix centesis? Centesis means to puncture, and it sounds a little like sun, tea. So for the two words, sun and tea, you picture the sun with a golf tee stuck in it, puncturing it. That image would tell you that the meaning of centesis is to puncture. Ology is another word element, and it means the study of. Ology sounds like hollow tree. You can see a giant hollow tree with scientists inside studying. They have beakers and test tubes and burners. This would suggest study. Not a bad image. Keywording is an applied technology that allows us to visually elaborate on information, and in that way, we're able to store it more effectively in our long-term memory. It also sets up a specific retrieval recognition pathway so that it's easier to recall this information. According to researchers, our visual recognition capacity is astonishing. Basically, the process of keywording entails the creation of a good mental image of the word and its definition. The image, in turn, keys the original idea that we want to recall. You can use this procedure to help learn languages, complex terminology, and abstract ideas. This is a process that takes some practice, so why not start now? Let's review some of the words we've learned. We'll just do a few. Beset. Promulgate. Pato. Mendacious. Proffer. Abhor. Centesis. Sanguine. Hiatus. So how did you do? I can assure you that alone or in combination with other memory techniques like chaining, keywording will increase your memory recall. By practicing clear, meaningful image making, you can strengthen your general creative capabilities and you'll have more memorable experiences in the memory zone. Hello, I'm Alan Butkowski. In this session, I'm going to introduce you to the location association technique. Sounds complicated, doesn't it? It's not really. Just hang in there with me. Remember the keyword and chaining technique and how we applied it to the presidents? The technique works very well, but what if the information you're trying to remember needs more order and structure, like the periodic table of the elements? If I asked you to tell me the 74th element in the table, you would have to count through the other 73 items in the chain before you finally came to tungsten. With the location association technique, you don't have to count through a lot of unwanted or unnecessary information to remember just one item. I'm going to show you how to set up an expandable 100 location matrix where you can store and retrieve almost any type of information and do it quickly. Let's give it a try. In your mind's eye, think of 10 rooms that you're familiar with. They can be the rooms of your home, a relative's house, or even the office where you work. In each of the rooms, we'll establish 10 standard locations. 10 locations in 10 rooms equals 100 different areas to locate information. The advantage of this system over the chaining technique is that we have numerical sequence to all the data. The first room will have locations 0 to 9.
Esteban provides teachers with solutions for meeting students' special needs. To register or for more information, call Mind Extension University at 1-800-777-MIND. Now stay tuned for Educational Psychology of the Gifted and Talented.
Identification of gifted and talented is a real problem, isn't it?
It's a very, very complex problem and cannot be separated from the culture or from the society.
Inseparable from culture, inseparable from society. But having admitted that does not excuse us from getting on with identifying the gifted among us.
Hello, I'm Bob Clausen of the University of Wisconsin Extension. In this half hour, we will be dealing with the identification of those gifted and talented students who may be said to be convergent. In general, these are the students who excel in the school as it is currently structured, or have the potential to do so at least. The gifted and talented should be identified earlier in their lives so that a qualitatively different educational experience can be made available to them right from the beginning. Identification should be a continuing process so that individuals who slip through initial screens undetected can be picked up later. In the past, programs for the gifted and talented have focused upon those students who exhibited IQ scores of 140 and above. Now, this is approximately 1% of the students. More liberal programs have included students all the way down to 115, approximately 15 or 16%. But to include that percentage opened the program up to questions as to whether or not the students were really gifted.
Kelly, I'm going to show you some pictures, and then I'm going to ask you what's foolish about the pictures, all right?
For 3 years, Barbara LaRose has been responsible for screening children into a kindergarten-level gifted and talented program in an urban school district. In this time, Barbara has had the experience of using just about every screening device available for use with young children. Having tried science, Barbara concludes that values are still paramount.
The dog's supposed to be chasing the rabbit, and the dog's looking the other way.
Good. Now I want you to tell me, in what way are wood and charcoal alike? How are they the same?
They're both dark colored.
Okay. Can you think of anything else? Another way that they would be alike or the same? Okay, fine. In what way are an apple and a peach alike?
They're both fruit.
Good.
The measurement of human intellectual function presents a great number of problems. The primary problem is that we cannot see the mind working. We can only see the results of its having worked.
In what way are...
Individual IQ tests are fine, carefully developed psychometric instruments. They use particular tests such as picture completion, picture arrangement, object assembly, block design, digit span, mazes, arithmetic, and vocabulary to develop a score for intelligence. But does being able to complete a picture mean an individual is intelligent? Does recalling a string of numbers frontward and backwards mean an individual is intelligent? Many will argue that experience and training have more to do with success on such tests than does intelligence. And if that's the case, it is not reasonable to place sole reliance on such scores for inclusion in or exclusion from a desirable program. A second problem with measuring intelligence is the problem of intake and output. Humans can see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. Obviously, vision, hearing, and touching are educationally important. It is clear that people can be both intelligent and blind, but vision problems can present testing problems. What if the child has expressive problems in speech or writing? What if the central nervous system is not intact? A third general problem deals with such things as motivation and cultural background. IQ scores change with the level of motivation at test-taking time. They change with health status. They change with an amount of sleep. Intelligence tests are useful, but they need to be taken with the proverbial grain of salt.
Barbara, you've had a considerable amount of experience in attempting to identify gifted, talented, and creative students in this
school system. Could you describe for us exactly what it is that you've been doing for the past 3 years by way of identification?
Well, exactly what we were trying to do in Racine was identify the very young gifted child, and to do it both with validity and with economic feasibility. The individual intelligence test is usually regarded as the best way to identify gifted children, and of course that's far too expensive, and is believed to have a lot of problems in terms of identifying the minority gifted child. And so our object was to identify the young gifted child and hopefully do a better job of identifying the young minority gifted child. And so we tried very, very hard to make that screening battery more culture fair or more culture free to whatever extent we could. And we also believe that as broad a definition of intelligence as we could arrive at would be the best. And so we chose a variety of instruments for that screening battery, and we're testing each child individually about an hour in the beginning, and it's cut now to about 45 minutes of individual testing. And there are verbal measures and nonverbal measures and problem-solving measures and creativity measures and even gross motor measurements in that screening battery.
And do you have some confidence that you're finding 100% of the gifted, talented, and creative students in the district?
No, certainly not the first year. I think we're beginning to come closer now as we accumulate data over the years. The first year there were several things that, well, let me say this. We identified for the gifted program 9% of the population, and found that we were not identifying some children because we had not controlled for things like socioeconomic status. We had not controlled for age. We found very definitely that age, for example, will serve as an advantage for a child. I mean, if a child is 6 months older, that will give him an advantage on the screening battery. So we had to control for age, and we're finding that if we also control for the socioeconomic status of the family, for preschool experience also served as an advantage for the children in being identified as gifted, that we can increase the prediction toward later achievement of children by adding those things to the tests. I mean, the tests alone are not quite enough.
You mentioned earlier the problem of identifying the minority student. Did 9% of the minority population show up in your results on your screening?
No. We simply made a value judgment, I guess, that one should expect to find equal numbers of gifted children across various population groups. And if one doesn't find that, there's probably something wrong with your identification procedure or your measurement procedures. And so we simply made a value judgment and said our minority children should be represented proportionately to their representation in the community. And so we did this. And it's very interesting to us that although they went in with a lower screening score, we found 7 or 8 very high IQ minority children. And getting back, to the reason for early identification, the past history of gifted programs in Racine would indicate that it's very rare that a minority child will be picked up on a group IQ test or on, let's say, all 9 stay 9s and achievement. They're just not picked up on those things. And so we very strongly believe that the fact that we identified 8 high IQ, and when I say high IQ, I mean on the Stanford-Binet intelligence test, high IQ minority children, this is several more than we identified previously over several years.
Identification of gifts and talents is a real problem, isn't it?
It's a very, very complex problem, and cannot be separated from the culture or from the society. In a simplistic way. I mean, we have to separate it. We have to begin to control for socioeconomic status and things like that. But it's not as simple.
But in the end, value judgments need to take over.
Yes.
Frequently, judgments about inclusion of children in gifted programs have included data from group intelligence tests.
In many ways, group intelligence tests have the characteristics of group achievement tests, and the most damaging of these is that they are most sensitive, that is, most discriminating around the mean. Some group IQ tests make it difficult or impossible for children to gain scores over 125. And that's a tragedy if an IQ of 140 is required for admission to a qualitatively different program. In comparing the results of group IQ tests with individual IQ tests, it has been noted that 50% or more of the students with unusual gifts are not identified by the group IQ test.
Peer nomination has been demonstrated to be a remarkably accurate identification procedure.
If I were to ask you the name of the best math person in your class, who would you say?
Steve.
And if I were to ask you the name of the best reader in your class, who would you say?
Tammy.
And if I were to ask you who was the smartest person in your room, who would you say?
Miss King.
Yes, but after Miss King, who would you say?
Kim Snyder.
Sally, who do you think is the best drawer in your class?
Penny.
And who do you think is the best in mathematics or arithmetic?
Shitty and Kim.
And if I were to ask you who are the 2 or 3 smartest kids in the room, who would you say?
Kim, Sherry, and... I don't know.
Marvy, who do you think is the best student in your class in arithmetic?
Raquel Cowboy.
And who do you think is the best reader?
Kim Snyder.
And who do you think is the best baseball player?
My brother.
And what's his name?
Lyle.
Kim, who do you think is the best drawer in the whole class?
Marvy Branch.
And who do you think is the best baseball player?
Brian Landor.
And if I were to ask you to name maybe the 2 smartest kids in the class, who would you name?
Kelly Corrigan and Chris McConville.
I've been told that you're a pretty smart little guy. Well, you're not so little. How do you feel about that? Do you like being smart?
Yes, it has its bright sides.
Well, what, for example, is a bright side?
Well, you get to go into higher grades. You get higher, in some of these real hard tests, usually you get higher grades because you know more about what they're asking and all. And I'm getting higher books and things. I'm only in 2nd grade. I'm on the 3rd grade book.
Do you like taking tests?
Once in a while. If I had a test every day, I think I'd get a little bored.
When you take a test, are you competing with the other kids in the room, or are you competing with yourself?
I'd say I'm pretty much competing with myself.
Do you like this school?
Yes.
What do you like best about it?
Mostly the library.
Are there any benefits to being smarter? Are there any advantages to being smarter?
No, maybe the kids don't think well. Maybe they just don't want to do their work right.
I know, but you think well and you do the work right. Isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, it's very good because then I don't have to correct all the time.
So it saves you a lot of time correcting if you're smart.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of any other reason why it's a good thing to be smart?
Yes. If people are chasing you on the recess grounds, it's a good thing to be smart because then you can think up a lot of stuff to get you out of that trouble.
But individual IQ tests have their problems as well. First of all, they're expensive, they're time-consuming, and they have been indicted for cultural bias. Since the IQ test ends up in a single score, the so-called intelligence quotient, it tries to represent human intellectual function as a single point. This idea of intelligence as represented by a score can be compared with the work of Guilford, who hypothesizes that there are about 120 ways in which the human intellect can be more or less successful. Guilford hypothesized that materials entering into the brain can be, for example, figural, shapes such as in geometry, symbolic, like math and music, semantic, which are words, of course, behavioral, like empathy. While in the brain, we can have cognition, that is, simply recognize things. We can remember it. We can have divergent production, use it to generate novel ideas. We can have convergent production, use it to solve problems. And we can even think about ourselves thinking, that's evaluation. As we think, and when we think, we can produce thought units, we can produce classes of thought, we can find relations among these classes and units, we can develop them into systems, we can take those systems and transform them, and out of that all we can come up with implications. The point of all this is to suggest the folly of trying to represent the complexity of the human intellect in a single score when there may be 120 scores possible. Bella Krantz is a professor of education at Moorhead State College in Minnesota. Bea was formerly associated with the Fairfax County in Virginia public school system, where she participated in the development of procedures by which children in that school system are screened into qualitatively different educational programs. Bea, in your estimation, how worthwhile, how adequate an index is the IQ score for screening children into a qualitatively different educational program?
Well, as you've already indicated, it is inadequate as a full range of reflecting what children are like. By that I mean most people who evaluate the IQ score have come to the conclusion, along with Guilford, that we're only measuring something like 6 components of intelligence. And based on what you have just indicated, that there may be at least 120 different kinds of intelligences, then we've become aware of the fact that 114 intelligences are not measured, not nurtured, and no programs are developed for them. So we are very concerned that we're missing a whole lot of children who are indeed different, unusual for this society, and whose needs have to be nurtured.
As I was talking about that, I kept using the word hypothesis, but empirical studies so far have come up with something like 80 of these.
Yes, Mary Mika is doing a lot of this work on the structure of intellect in Los Angeles, and while I'm not thoroughly familiar with all of her work, I've seen some of the things, and there will be more research along this line. In my own case, I didn't take that particular approach, but I took the same philosophical approach and came up with a smaller range of talents, which I identified and labeled, and then developed performance criteria for, and then helped teachers become aware of them to help me with the identification.
When we talk about identifying children, in your estimation, is it important, is it valuable to identify children early in their academic careers?
I think it's extremely important to to identify the youngsters as early as possible, keeping in mind, of course, that there is a process going on, and not that children become less intelligent as they get older, but that you may be missing some children so that, as I think you've already indicated, there had better be continuous screening going on in the development of children's lives as they move through school. But early identification, I think, gives us a lot of non-paper and pencil type characteristics of intelligence which you can see in the young child and which older children mask.
They say that infant IQ scores and early IQ scores are notoriously unreliable. Have you found that to be the case?
Well, I don't even want to get into the range, into the realm of discussion of IQ scores. I would rather talk about behaviors. And I really, I'm not into infant behaviors. I would certainly feel very confident in looking at children somewhere between the ages of 3 and up, making some hypotheses about who shows signs of unusual progress.
Can you give us some indication of what some of those signs of unusual progress might be?
Okay, the kinds of things I'm thinking of are the following. We begin to see in young children some abilities that, according to all psychological evidence that we have, should not be there. which is not to say that the psychological evidence is wrong, but simply that we have to be more flexible in interpreting it. For example, I have seen young children as early as 3 and 4 play chess. Now, if you just use Piaget's stages of learning, they shouldn't be able to do that. They shouldn't have a sense of equivalency, a whole lot of other jargonistic terms I don't want to use for purposes of this program. But what I think is involved here is a complicated process going on. And when you do see things like that in young children, it's something to pay attention to. Or let's take another characteristic. I have seen 5-year-olds play gin rummy or casino. Now, in some culturally different homes, they take that for granted. But for me, that's an important cognitive advance. So if I had that kind of information, I would put that child into some other kinds of environmental task problems, and I could see some other things, which would lead me to believe that we have an unusual child.
Okay, now playing chess and playing casino are not things that the school ordinarily relates to. Let's take an issue like reading. It's been suggested that many children who could be identified as gifted enter the school reading, but I've also seen literature that suggests that among those children who do enter the school reading, and some of Doris Durkin's work relates to this, that by the time they get in the 5th grade, those initial differences in reading have disappeared. Let's take an issue like early reading.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a behavior that teachers should look for?
I think it's a behavior one should look for, but like the IQ score by itself, it isn't enough. On the other hand, I don't think one should say, just because the child is reading is no sign that the child is gifted, which is what a great many first-grade teachers say, and they're wrong too. It is a complicated process. How the kid cracks the code is very interesting. Again, it's not my field. I only have a superficial knowledge of this, but it's a very interesting one. The whole acquisition of language and the way children learn to read without much help from the adult world is something you pay attention to, but it's not the whole ball of wax.
Mm-hmm. For me at least, the fact that they lose the initial advantage they have suggests to me that they should have been in a qualitatively different program so that they would not have lost that initial advantage.
That may be. I see what you're getting at. It's very possible that a child who learned to read and was doing quite well begins to stabilize simply because he's in a pedestrian kind of educational setting and no longer values continuing with this. But I think we should also keep in mind what 5th grade level reading may mean, and that is it's a certain plateau. Then beyond that, there is the acquisition of more complicated vocabulary, et cetera, depending on what you give the child. I'm thinking, for example, of a child I know who learned to read, again, by herself as early as 2.5 or 3, with a teacher mother who kept saying, that's terrible. I'll have to take the child to the museum, build terrariums, do anything, but don't read. Well, such a child had so many strengths that she pursued. At 8, this child, who should have been, in 2nd or 3rd grade, was reading all of the Shakespearean comedies. And I can remember when she got the Rockwell 10th edition of Shakespeare for her birthday, she went around telling all of the other children who couldn't appreciate it. Just imagine owning it, because she had only seen it in the library.
When we talk about observing behaviors like chess and casino and reading, we're talking about using teacher judgment to identify gifted and talented students. There are some other possibilities. For example, peer judgment. Have you ever seen that work out to be successful? Can children identify other children who are successful?
The literature seems to indicate, so far, that other children are better identifiers of the gifted in their own classes than the teachers.
That's interesting.
And that is not only interesting, but of course it's devastating, especially if we share this with teachers. But I wonder if I can digress for just a moment and share with you the information that shows that there are other ways of finding these intelligent, unusual human beings, and that IQ tests alone are not always our best asset. A student that came to my attention that fits this category was a 16-year-old boy who was highly rated by teachers. He was considered a good physicist and gifted musically. He was a lively, charming type of person. He gained an open scholarship to Cambridge. This is in the English system. He recently took a first in the physics exam, yet his IQ was lower than 80% of his classmates, some of whom left school with no A levels at all. Now, when we find a child at that age who is so talented, we have to ask ourselves, what does the IQ test tell us about the range of intelligence? The other thing I think that should be pointed out at this time is that because it is a unitary figure and gives the impression that this is the whole child, we don't pay attention to all the other talents that are giving us screaming clues about abilities. And consequently, what happens is that we don't pay attention to these other talents, which are infinitely more important than the IQ score at some given point.
I think you're going to have to list a few of those.
Okay. The kinds of talents I'm thinking about are the child who is more a problem finder than a problem solver. This is the pain-in-the-neck youngster who, after you have performed this wonderful experiment on carbon monoxide and oxygen, etc., says, but what if, and takes something away from the experiment, and there goes your lesson plan. Such a child is not exactly an enjoyable person to a teacher. The other children don't know what to make of him. But you'll find if you pay attention to that kind of clue, it happens more and more. Now, if we don't take that to be as relevant a piece of information as the IQ score, we have missed an important component of intelligence. Because when these children take tests in which they have to choose A, B, C, or D, they want E. They write it in. Now, you know that the computer isn't going to pick that up, the scoring.
It's going to pick it up. It's going to mark it wrong.
Wrong, exactly. So I find that what we need to do is to look at some other talents. Okay, the problem finder is one of them. Another one is a child who has this unusual spatial and psychomotor ability. The chess player I was talking about. That is a spatial concept. The chess player is another one. It's a spatial concept. Another kind of child is one who finds pattern where no one else does. We take the studio, for example, the relationship of color. Now, other kids just see beautiful effect. This child says, did you ever notice that the chartreuse repeats itself? That's a spatial kind of, he sees pattern. It's also a mathematical way of thinking. I could go on, but that gives you some clue as to the range of talents one ought to be aware of, and that gives you much more information, frankly, than an IQ score.
Thank you, Bea. In this half hour, we've suggested that identifying the gifted and talented is a complex problem. Our notion of intellect has changed over the years, and our ways of identifying it must change too. Since there is no one good way to identify the convergent talented, a variety of measures have been suggested. Work samples, teacher judgment, even peer judgment are all possible screens. And we don't need to ignore the IQ score or the achievement test score. Our caution is not to place undue reliance upon them. And the purpose for identifying the gifted and talented is to get them into qualitatively different educational programs so as to allow them to develop to the limits of their potential to develop. Thank you for being with us.
As in any college, you will be assigned a professor who will be available to you to respond personally to any questions or problems you may have. Credit for each successfully completed course can be applied to bachelor and associate degree programs at most colleges and universities. Isn't it time to give yourself the advantages of a college education?
Don't delay. To preview courses available through the Mind Extension University or to get more information, please call our toll-free number, 1-800-777-MIND. The Mind Extension University. Open your mind to your future.
Coming up next on Mind Extension University, Introduction to Biology. Offered for credit by Colorado State University. This course is designed to develop an understanding of the basic concepts of biology. Students will study the characteristic elements, processes, and features common to all life forms. To register or for more information, call our toll-free number, 1-800-777-MIND. Now stay tuned for Introduction to Biology.
All living things of the earth need nutrition. Including plants. Most animals can move about to obtain their nutrition from plants or from other animals. But the plants are rooted to one spot. They must make their own food from water, minerals, and carbon dioxide. Today we'll see the role that roots and leaves play in obtaining the raw materials and creating those nutrients. What happens to a plant that can't get the basic mineral molecules, like iron or phosphorus? Such plants will show the effect of those deficiencies. This one, for example, is lacking iron. You can see that its leaves are a characteristic yellow color, and the leaf veins are darker and more pronounced. Here's another example. The tomato plant on the right is lacking phosphorus. Note the purple color to its leaves, characteristic of phosphorus deficiency.
To get minerals for healthy growth, most plants rely upon roots that grow in the soil. Their roots are useful in two main ways. First, they support and anchor the plant. And secondly, they absorb water and minerals from the soil. Roots may be classified according to their form into two general groups. A long principal root that extends deep into the soil is called a taproot. And roots that are mostly branched and divided up near the surface of the soil are called fibrous roots. Let's compare the growth of the two root systems underground and in time-lapse photography. The bean seed on the left grows a taproot system. The corn seed on the right is growing the branched surface roots of a fibrous root system. As you watch the germination of pea seed roots, you might wonder how the tender new roots can penetrate the rough soil. They can do so because the tip of the root is covered with protective cells. Those cells form what's called a root cap.
Under the microscope, you can see the cells of the root cap. These cells are much tougher than the ones behind them, which allows the root to penetrate the soil as it grows. But the roots can respond to changes in the soil as they grow. Here are 3 bean seeds germinating near a rock. Notice what happens when the roots reach the rock. can usually grow around natural obstructions. Moisture is essential for root growth. When the tip of this pea root hits a layer of dry soil, its growth and length stops. This is because growth and length occurs just behind the root cap, which senses the dryness. Here we painted some marks on a bean root. As it grows, you can see that most of the growth is taking place where the gap develops between the dots. Clearly, it's just behind the root cap where the expansion occurs. The part of the root not growing in length grows in thickness. It is here that branch roots grow. Their growth begins inside the main root. If we look down on the main root under a microscope, we can see the early development of the branch root.
At first, the branch roots will appear as buds on the main root. Then they develop into branch roots. Still others will grow out of those original branch roots. And the branching will continue in this way. So in several weeks, a root system has developed that can absorb water and nutrients from a large area of soil. We should mention here that most water absorption occurs in roots near the surface. That's true for both the taproot system, seen here on the left, and the fibrous root system on the right. For example, these cacti have a very good fibrous root system near the surface in order to quickly absorb the sparse rainfall of the desert. This comparison shows the rapid absorption in the watered cactus on the right. Absorption is only one function of roots. The other function is to anchor and support the plant against strong winds and rains. And a secondary benefit of the supporting root system is keeping topsoil in place. For example, if plants are cleared from the land, the absence of roots will cause topsoil runoff during heavy rainfalls.
Sometimes, as in a corn plant, the roots will grow from the stem above the soil to provide additional support. These too can absorb water and minerals. Most of the absorption takes place through root hairs. These radish seeds are germinating on top of the ground, so we'll be able to see the development of the roots and root hairs. The tiny white strands behind the root cap are the root hairs. These greatly increase the surface area of roots for absorption. It might surprise you to learn that root hairs seldom live for more than a few days. So the root system must constantly expand and grow. In fact, a single clump of grass may grow over 1 million new hairs per day. Under the microscope, we can see that each root hair is a projection of a single surface cell. Many of the epidermal cells just behind the root cap elongate to form the unicellular root hair. Inside is protoplasm, which absorbs the molecules of minerals and water. After the roots have absorbed the water and soluble minerals, these substances must be transported upward from the roots through the stem and branches to the leaves. This conduction is accomplished by two different types of conduction tubes, the xylem and the phloem. In the carrot, both are located in this central area. It's the xylem that transports the molecules of water and minerals to the leaves. Here's how a carrot absorbs water and mineral molecules. The water is represented by the light-colored dots and the minerals by the dark. The taproot and root hairs can both absorb directly through their cell walls. The root hairs greatly increase the absorbing surface of the root. The molecules of water and minerals diffuse through the cells toward the xylem in the center of the carrot. Notice that some dark mineral molecules are filtered out and stay in the cortex cells in the center of your picture. The molecules are conducted upward by the xylem, through the stems, and into the leaves. Here, in the presence of the sun's rays, the water and minerals are used in photosynthesis to make simple sugars. These simple sugars form the various foods that nourish the plant. The white dots now represent the simple sugars that are carried to all cells of the plant, including the root cells. The sugars are carried back down the plant in the phloem tubes. So the xylem conducts the raw materials for food upward, and the phloem conducts the food back down to all the plant cells. So we've seen how roots are constructed and how they're supposed to work. Yet there's one element that all plants require that is sometimes scarce on farmlands. That element is nitrogen. If a plant doesn't get enough nitrogen, it just doesn't grow as it should. You can see that the new leaves are green, but the older leaves have turned yellow. Here, nitrogen deficiency stunted the growth of the tomato plant on the right. That's why most commercial fertilizers contain large amounts of nitrogen to help avoid this deficiency.
Nitrogen fertilizers are usually in crystal form. Air is mostly nitrogen gas, but most plants can't use it directly. It must first be changed into compounds like this ammonium nitrate. But there are certain kinds of natural occurring bacteria, algae, and fungi which can capture or fix the nitrogen of the air and change it into a form that plants can use. If we take a sample of this water and put it under a microscope, we can see activity there. And if we slow down the action, we can identify the long chain-like algae called anabina, which are among the world's best nitrogen fixers. Let's see how the soybean plant utilizes bacteria to obtain its nitrogen. The bacteria live in the soil, and they enter the roots to form nodules. A cross-section of one nodule shows that this tissue consists of plant material and is actually denser than the rest of the plant. Within this tissue are the bacteria which are responsible for the nodule formation. If we prepare a culture of the proper bacteria and place the root hair from a soybean plant into it, we can see how the nodule develops. There's the growing root hair. The bacteria invade the root hair. The bacteria divide and begin to form a colony. The colony takes shape, and the plant tissue within this colony begins to change. It grows quickly and expands until a nodule is formed. Inside the nodule, nitrogen gas is being converted to nitrates the plant can use. Nitrogen is also made available by bacteria, which break down waste and dead organisms and release the chemical elements that were stored there. So you see, nitrogen compounds can be made available in several ways. Sometimes roots have other special functions in addition to absorption and anchoring of the plant. For instance, the food sent down the phloem from the leaves may accumulate if it isn't used for new growth. We have selected one root cell to see the granules of starch forming. This food entering the cell is not being used immediately for plant growth. Instead, it's stored for the plant's later use. Or or it may be eaten by animals.
Up to this point, we've been dealing mainly with two of the basic necessities for plant survival. First, obtaining plant nutrients, and second, the conduction system for those nutrients. A third necessity is for gas exchange, in a sense, breathing. All active plant cells breathe, much as you and I do. Yet plants don't have lungs to inhale or exhale air. So each plant cell must rely on simple diffusion. Most stems and leaves are covered with airtight protective coatings to prevent the cells from drying out in the open air. So gas exchange occurs through pores called stomata. As we can see with the electron microscope, the surface of this leaf is pitted with stomata, or air pores. Here in cross-section are the leaf stomata, which are usually located on the underside. The soft stems of many smaller plants will also have stomata for gas exchange. When a stoma from a leaf or stem is placed under water and viewed through a microscope, we can actually see a gas bubble forming when oxygen or carbon dioxide is released. Some larger plants, like these bushes and trees, have thick woody stems. For gas exchange to occur in the stems, woody plants rely on pores or lenticels. On this trunk of a tree, you can see the lenticels, the slash marks right here. Under the microscope, you can see that the lenticels penetrate into the stem. Gas diffuses through these openings into the tree. Gas exchange for the roots, however, is usually simpler than in the stems and leaves.
In the roots, diffusion can go on directly. Air simply penetrates the surface cells of the root. The condition of the soil is a very important part of this whole process. And here's John Lenanton, botanist, horticulturist from Orange Coast College, who can tell us more about soil.
Lloyd, I think the first important thing is to say what soil is. The soil that I have here, my hand, started off millions of years ago as solid rock. And then what has happened over those years is that very slowly that solid rock has been broken down into smaller and smaller and smaller particles by things like frost and wind and rain and water and so on. And during that transformation, plants first of all became attached to the surface of those rock pieces. And then later, when the particles were smaller, then other species of plants sent their roots down into these rock particles, in between the particles. And the plants lived there, they died, and they decomposed. And they formed organic material. We sometimes call that humus. And this became incorporated with those rock particles to form soil. Now, the amount of water that a soil holds depends upon two things. The size of the particle that has been broken down and the amount of organic material in the soil. The organic material, the humus, acts very much like a sponge does in the way that it holds water. And now let's look at how water is held in the soil particles. It's held in two ways. One, as a film of water around each particle, and then in the small spaces between the particles. Now, because this particular soil that we're looking at has large particles, it's called a sand soil. The pores, the spaces between the particles, are very large, and that is where air is held. And it is only in the small spaces that water is held. So a sandy soil doesn't hold very much water. It's very well drained, and it holds a lot of air, but not much water. If we move across then to this soil here, which has small particles, and that soil is a clay soil. The particles are very small. They're microscopic. They're packed very closely together. What happens is that with this close packing, the spaces are very small between the particles. And it's in these small spaces that a lot of water is held. It's very difficult for water to get between the particles. There's very little air in the soil. In certain clay soils, you can get to a situation where you have all water and no air, and the roots begin to suffocate and the plants die. The best kind of soil is one that is a mixture of the different particle sizes. Over here, I set up a little experiment a few moments ago with two tubes, one containing a clay soil and the other one containing sand. And in these tubes, I put an equal amount of water. I'll pour a little more in each one. There. And here. Right? Now, let's see how far down the water has wetted the soil in this container. Down to that far. Let's see how much the same amount of water has wetted the sand. All the way down to the bottom. The sand does not hold very much water. The clay soil holds a great deal of water. As important as drainage is, some plants have special adaptations that allow them to live with their roots totally submerged in water. This is a mangrove tree. It grows in swampy regions where water will often cover its roots completely. So, the mangrove sprouts air roots that grow up from the submerged roots and into the air. The air roots are covered with lenticels that permit gases to exchange. Another exception is kelp. Ocean water has plenty of carbon dioxide and oxygen dissolved in it. Kelp is adapted to absorb these gases from the sea.
Thank you, John. We've now examined the three basic needs for plant survival: nutrients, conducting system, and gas exchange. Let's now look at a few interesting plant specializations and adaptations. For instance, in extremely dry climates, special adaptations help the plant to obtain and conserve water. One that we've already seen is a well-developed network of surface roots. When those roots absorb the water, it's quickly conducted to specialized water storage cells in the stem. The stem responds by expanding like an accordion. Another example of water conservation can be found in some mosses. During dry weather, the moss leaves close to prevent drying. And during moist weather, the leaves will open up once again. Insect-eating plants like this pitcher plant are found in boggy areas where nitrogen is scarce. The spiny bristles prevent this ladybug from climbing upward. So it eventually falls into the water-filled portion, seen here in cross-section. In the dark portion at the base, the plant absorbs nitrogen and other minerals from the bodies of the insects that it captures. And the ladybug is one of them. This specialization of the pitcher plant requires no movement to obtain the extra nutrients.
There are other carnivorous plants, however, that are more aggressive. This is a sundew plant. Its leaves are covered with tentacles that are capped with a sticky substance, which shines in the sun like dew. Instead of simply luring an insect, the sundew will actually wrap its tentacles around any insect that becomes trapped. These carnivorous plants have green leaves that produce food like other plants. They also obtain minerals through their roots. However, those carnivorous plants that catch insects tend to survive and grow better than those that don't. In boggy spots of North Carolina, we find the Venus flytrap. It's perhaps the most remarkable and active of all carnivorous plants. Each leaf is folded in the center and has teeth-like projections. Attracted by the perfume glands along the edge of the leaf, this earwig is making a dangerous exploration. Once caught in the trap, it's digested by the fluid produced inside the leaves. A healthy trap may snap shut in less than 1/2 second. Now let's examine the inside of a fly trap and see the trigger hairs. There are usually 6 of them, 3 on each side. Notice that one stimulus does not cause the trap to close. It's necessary to touch the same hair twice to get action. Or the trap closes when 2 hairs are touched, one, then the other. All shots of the trap closing were taken at normal camera speed. This earwig smells the baiting aroma of the trap, but moves with caution. Luckily, it's too clumsy to enter this trap, and too fast to be captured by this one. Sometimes a trap may be defective and only close part way. This seems to confuse the Japanese beetle. Now the beetle enters another trap that's working perfectly. Earwigs and other medium-sized insects cannot get out of the fly trap, which only squeezes them tighter as they struggle. But the large Japanese beetle is strong and hardy, and after a short struggle, manages to escape. For the Venus flytrap, it's like fishing. The big ones get away.
Some other plants also have unusual ways of obtaining their nutrients. There are specialized plants that don't manufacture their food at all. One kind is called a parasite. It gets its food from another living plant that it grows upon, its host. And if the parasites are too numerous, they will kill their host plant. And then there are the mushrooms. They're saprophytes. They obtain their nutrients from dead vegetation in the soil. And the epiphytes are plants that grow on top of other plants above the ground. They're not rooted in the soil. Epiphytes produce their own nutrients, so they don't normally harm the plant they're growing upon. Some orchids are epiphytes. Sometimes plants grow and survive in places where they wouldn't normally grow, because humans provide additional minerals or water. Often a water supply is the main addition, especially in deserts where the soil is rich in unused minerals. And so, with just simple molecules, the leaves of plants can produce their own nutrients. But the entire animal kingdom, including us, is completely dependent upon plants, our ultimate source of nutrition.
Open your mind.
There are numerous ugly words in our language: scab, bigot, cripple, war, rape, to name a few. But one of the ugliest and most terrifying to many people, one that strikes fear into the hearts of brave women and makes strong men cringe, is grammar. What terrifies us so much about this subject is hard to understand, but frightened many are, judging from my classes, seminars, and workshops with numerous business and professional people. So, if you feel faint at the mention of the word grammar, or if you experience a sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach, move over. You have lots of company. And I hope I'll have your company during this program about grammar, during the next 3 on spelling, punctuation, and mechanics, and during the following 8 on business writing. I'm going to do my best to help you improve your writing skills. I hope you'll do your best to listen intently and to perform the exercises conscientiously in the workbook. And now, back to grammar. Why are so many people so apprehensive about it? Let me mention 2 reasons. First of all, most people think that they don't have an adequate grasp of grammar. Some remember being drilled on all sorts of rules in high school, but can't recall what they were. Others weren't drilled on rules, but wish now they had been. Both these groups worry about grammar. They fear committing some error that will embarrass them or expose them to ridicule. It's about as bad, they feel, as having their slip show or having their fly open. As a matter of fact, that fear of grammatical error plagues people so much that it paralyzes their writing. As a result, they write safe little sentences, trying to stay away from trouble. Thus, their work often sounds childish or gives the impression of being stilted and artificial, with little blood and guts to it. So the purpose of mastering grammar is not to pass some English teacher's test, but to give you confidence and to enable you to write correctly and effectively. Why am I telling you all of this? Because if you understand what grammar is and how it functions, in other words, if you have some grasp of the philosophy of grammar, then you'll be better able to master many grammatical problems. First of all, what is grammar? It's at least 2 subjects. One is concerned with describing how our language functions. It does this to some extent by identifying various parts of speech. Remember such terms as nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs, and also the terms that describe the role or function of words in a sentence. Words like subject, object, phrase, and clause. And perhaps you even remember diagramming. But whether you diagrammed or not, grammar helps us to talk about words in a sentence and to understand their role, just like such terms as catcher, forward, and tight end help us to identify players in sports and to understand their role. But today we're not going to be concerned with grammar as a descriptive system. Instead, we're interested in grammar as the study of the structure of our language. It's similar to what we mean by grammar when we study a foreign language. We have to know the vocabulary or meaning of words and the grammar or the way the words function. Now, I've got a surprise for you. If you were born or educated in this country, you already know most of all the important grammatical principles. Let me prove it to you. You understand all about word order, for example. The pocketbook, the woman, in store, the bought. You wouldn't utter or write that sentence, although a foreigner might. You realize that in a statement, the subject or actor, the woman, appears before the verb or action word, bought, while the object or receiver of the action, the pocketbook, follows. Come on. You knew all that information about word order, even if you couldn't explain it that way. And you wouldn't write, the buyer who is in her office. You know that's not a complete sentence. And you recognize all sorts of grammatical signals in our language, even though you may not be aware of it. Look at this sentence of nonsense words. Even though you don't know their meaning, you can figure out what's happening in the sentence from your knowledge of grammar. The Frangers merrically gleased the Bopdens Woport. The Frangers, whoever they are, and note that you recognize the S ending as a sign of the plural, the Frangers merrically gleased. Note the signal. The ED at the end of gleased indicates it's a verb, and the LY at the end of merrically signals it's an adverb. So we know that the Frangers committed the act of gleasing, and that they did it merrically. And whom did the Frangas glease? Why, the Boston's Woolport, of course. Now, you recognize from the apostrophe S that the Woolport belongs to the Bostons, whoever that is. So we don't actually know who's doing what to whom, but as a result of your grammatical knowledge, you know what's going on. It might be something like this. The directors quickly accepted the president's report. My point in all these examples is to show you that you know more about grammar than you think you do. I don't know you well. After all, we just met. But I don't think you'd write any of these sentences. We was asked to submit our expenses. Me took the check to the cashier. The manager asked for them things. Please give this memo to he. You wouldn't write those, would you? Say, what's this all about? I'm here because I don't know grammar, and you keep telling me I do. Go to the head of the class. But hold on, I don't contend that you know everything. Fasten your seatbelt because it's tough going from now on. Okay, it's fastened. Now, although you do know a lot about grammar, you probably have some problems, particularly in 3 areas: subject-verb agreement, pronoun reference, and pronoun case. Let me illustrate by giving you a brief quiz. On a scrap of paper or in any space in your workbook, jot down the correct word within the parentheses in the following sentences. 1. Enclosed is or are the company manual and the directory. 2. The morale of the supervisors is or are high. 3. Each of the managers is or are responsible. 4. The committee is or are still undecided. 5. Either the assistants or the buyer is or are coming. 'Ready or not, let's look at the sentences. As some of you may realize, they all involve subject-verb agreement. That grammatical principle requires you're using singular verbs with singular subjects and plural verbs with plural subjects.